Chapter 281. Discussion on staying or leaving in the floating palace. One's heart was full of beauty after the great change in Qinsang school in the past. The Xianmen aristocratic families rose above the master and disciple lineage in one fell swoop. However, after the three pools of lake demons were eliminated, the master and disciple lineage recovered and regained their power to suppress the aristocratic families. For hundreds of years, the aristocratic families were far from being united. Faced with the overbearing power of the master and disciple lineage, they were like a plate of loose sand. In the past 20 years, the sect leader, Qin Mabai, had taken down several Xianmen aristocratic families. Because of this, in order to salvage the unfavorable situation, the 5 families in the sect secretly pushed for the pill grading assembly. It was all for the sake of making a name for themselves and gathering people's hearts. They originally thought that they would be able to suppress the arrogance of the master and disciple lineage. However, the master and disciple Zhang Yan, looked down on everyone. With the power of a first-grade golden core, he defeated many true disciples of the aristocratic families in the assembly, causing the pill grading assembly to end in silence. After the assembly, the 3 spiritual masters, Zheng, Du, and Feng, returned to their clans and meditated in seclusion. Once the news spread, the entire sect was in an uproar and was extremely shocked. It must be known that in the 10,000 years of Qinsang school's history, there were very few people who had such achievements. It immediately attracted the attention of everyone. Some were deep in thought, some were impressed, some were indifferent, and some were wary and hostile. All of these people had their own agendas. Under the mountain gate, there was already a turbulent undercurrent. However, this matter also spread throughout the 10 great sects of Donghua. Everyone knew that Qinsang school had produced another outstanding true disciple who shocked the past and present. 5 days after the Furious Waves Cliff Assembly, in Qinsang school, the sound of a bell rang throughout the mountain gate. However, it was different from the usual. This sound came from the jade bell above the heavenly gate. Those with slightly higher positions in the sect immediately knew that this was the sect leader summoning the 4 disciples. The clouds in the floating heavenly palace were misty and colorful. A strange fragrance wafted through the air, an auspicious light rushed into the clouds. A chime sounded from outside the hall as a young man dressed in a golden robe walked in. He was one of the 4 enlightened masters, Sun Jiyan. He walked into the basilica with a smile on his face. When he turned his gaze, he saw that Mengzhen had already taken his seat at the head of the basilica. Mengzhen had a jade-like face and big ears. His eyes were slightly closed, and his black beard hung down to his chest. He looked dignified and upright. Mengzhen hurriedly cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, eldest senior brother." Mengzhen opened his eyes and nodded. "Junior martial brother Sun, you're here." Sun Jinren accepted the gifts and sat on the last praying mat. Just as he was about to speak, Mengzhen waved his horsetail whisk and said, "Let the sect master make the decision." Sun Jinren nodded and sat still. Not long after, 2 chimes came from outside. Immortal Zhu and Immortal Yan entered the main hall one after another. When they saw Mengzhen, they cupped their hands and greeted, "Eldest brother." Mengzhen bowed slightly in return and said, "You don't have to be so courteous." Immortal Zhu and Immortal Yan nodded at Sun Jinren again. Then, they sat down on their respective praying mats and didn't say a word. After waiting for an hour, he suddenly felt something in his heart. He immediately looked up and saw a shadow that was already sitting on the jade platform. The 4 enlightened masters immediately straightened their faces and stood up together. They cupped their hands and said, "Welcome, sect master." A gentle voice came from the shadow. "Disciples, you don't have to be so courteous. Go back to your seats." The 4 enlightened masters bowed again and returned to their seats. They sat upright and still. They all looked like they were listening to teachings and didn't dare to be rude. The sect master said gently, "I called you here because of the true disciple, Zhang Yan. You should know what's going on." There was silence. After a while, Mengzhen bowed to the sect master and said, "Master, I have something to say." The sect master said, "Say it, Jinren Meng's expression turned serious as he looked at his three junior brothers. He lowered his voice and said, Zhang Yandan has reached the first rank. He is the first person in our sect to achieve this in 1,000 years. This is the fortune of our Yinsang sect. The ancestors of the past generations must be greatly comforted after knowing about this. Therefore, in my opinion, we should immediately bestow upon him the mystical skills and the true teachings of the Great Path to help him reach a higher level. Immortal Zhu frowned when he heard this. The sect master saw it clearly. He said, Zhixing, what do you have to say? He chuckled and said, today's gathering is not restricted. If you have something to say, you can say it. Immortal Zhu hurriedly bowed and said, Master, in my opinion, although eldest brother's words are reasonable, Zhang Yan has achieved the first grade of Dan and should also be rewarded. However, he has been searching for medicine outside for 20 years. Now Zhang Yan has returned to the sect and hasn't achieved anything. If we bestow techniques at this time, I'm afraid it will cause dissatisfaction among the disciples in the sect and cause discord. Immortal Yan also said, what senior brother Zhu said is very true. Moreover, Zhang Yan has achieved the first grade of Jin Dan, so it is inevitable that he will be arrogant. Therefore, in my opinion, we should choose a small cold world and let him cultivate in seclusion. On one hand, it can temporarily calm down the disturbance, and on the other hand, it can help him cultivate his mind. Sun Jinren sneered and said, Senior brother Yan, what do you mean by this? It is a blessing for the sect that my disciple has achieved the first grade of Dan. If we don't say that we will reward him, how can we let him go to such a remote and cold place? Isn't this equivalent to punishing and exiling him? Immortal Yan replied unhurriedly, not so. This matter has caused a great uproar, and everyone knows it. You should know that the tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. Zhang Yan seems to be doing well, but in fact, he is in the teeth of the storm. I don't know how many people have ulterior motives behind him. You should know that it is easy to dodge a spear in the open, but it is difficult to guard against an arrow in the dark. It is not easy to achieve the first grade of Dan. If he goes to the small cold world to cultivate, he can take advantage of the situation to escape. In the open, he will be demoted, but in fact, he can avoid those treacherous plots. This is my sincere love for him. Junior brother, don't make presumptions and misunderstand my intention. Sun Jinren frowned slightly. Junior brother, please don't make wild guesses and misunderstand my intentions. Meng Zhen stroked his beard and said in a deep voice, what junior brother Yan said is somewhat reasonable. It is not an exaggeration to say that Zhang Yan is now the target of public criticism in the eyes of the aristocratic families, but it is not appropriate for him to enter the small cold world. He cupped his hands and said, Master, disciple thinks that we can temporarily suppress the reward. However, in 3 years, there will be a competition in the sect. Pass down a decree that we will only secretly bestow him a cultivation method and ask him to cultivate well in the sect. He must not be ostentatious at will. When the competition comes, if he can show his outstanding talent, then we can mention it at that time. This will also be justifiable, and we won't have to worry about the dissatisfaction of the disciples in the sect. As soon as he said this, Immortal Zhu and Immortal Yan also nodded in agreement. Sun Jinren also did not say anything. Zhang Yan had achieved the first grade of Dan, so he had a chance to win the position of the top 10 disciples. However, at the moment, they were thinking about how to deal with the aristocratic families in the competition. If Zhang Yan suddenly interfered, then many of the previous arrangements would have to be pushed back, and it would cause many variables. Although these 4 immortals were secretly competing, it was better to stay put than to move. Naturally, they did not want to lose their initial initiative, so they reached a rare consensus. Especially from Sun Jinren's point of view, Zhang Yan was a true disciple. Now that he had achieved the first grade of Dan, he was more qualified to become the top 10 disciples than Ning Chongxian, so he had some concerns in his heart. But now, Meng Zhen first gave him a small reward to appease him, so that he could settle down for a few years and make room for Ning Chongxian to win the position of the top 10 disciples. This could be considered as taking into account the previous plan of the immortals to the greatest extent. Seeing that the four of them had reached a consensus, the sect leader immortal made the final decision and said, "Then this matter will be arranged as such for the time being. Regarding Zhang Yan's reward, we will discuss it later. From today onwards, all of you will stay in your respective cave residences. Before the competition, you are not allowed to go out at will. If you violate the rules, you will be punished according to the sect rules." The four immortals stood up together and said, "Yes, Master." They were also aware of the order of the sect leader immortal. Now that Zhang Yan had disrupted the pill-grading assembly of the Xianmen aristocratic families, although it had caused the aristocratic families to lose a lot of face, in reality, it was not the slightest bit of damage. It was not a good time to pursue and attack. They were about to restrain their swords and settle it all at once during the competition. Freezing Zhang Yan was precisely to send a signal to the aristocratic families, which undoubtedly conflicted with them in advance. The sect leader immortal waved his hand and said, "You may leave." The four immortals said in unison, "Sect leader Master, we will take our leave." After the four of them left, a figure flashed above the main hall, and a mighty old man walked in. He said suspiciously, "Qin Mabai, what are you planning? Won't this disappoint that Zhang brat? Such a fine talent, if you don't know how to carve, I will teach you a lesson on behalf of your master." Qin Mabai smiled faintly and said, "Uncle Baiming, don't be angry. This child is quick-witted." He knew long ago that after this matter, he would definitely be in the limelight, so he purposely restrained himself. "What I am doing is just complying with his intentions." The mighty old man thought about it, but felt a headache coming on. He shook his head and walked out without saying a word. On dissolving Smoke Island, smoke and dust covered the sun. Sparks flew in the sky, and one could not even see their fingers in front of them. In the roaring fire palace, a white-robed Taoist sat upright on a cloud couch. This person had thin lips and hawk-like eyes. His gaze was sharp, and the back of his hands was as fair as a woman's. He sat there and read the flying sword in his hand. After a while, he said casually, "First-grade pill? That's quite interesting." Feng Zhen knelt in front of him. He lowered his body and kowtowed, saying, "Master, if that Zhang Yan doesn't succeed, he will definitely become a great threat in the future. Moreover, he harmed the lives of Junior Brother Tu and Junior Brother Wan. It is abominable. Every time I think of this, I feel grief in my heart and can't help myself. Master, you must seek justice for them." The white-robed Taoist said indifferently, "Junior Brother Tu and Junior Brother Wan, who are they?" Feng Zhen's heart trembled when he heard this. He knelt down with a thud and said, "This disciple deserves to die." Cold sweat dripped from his forehead. His master was one of the top 10 disciples in the sect, so how could he not remember his disciples? The reason he said this was obviously because he saw through his intentions and wanted to warn him. The white-robed Taoist grunted and patted his knee, saying, "You are at the first level of core transformation, right?" Feng Zhen lowered his head and said, "Yes." The white-robed Taoist waved his hand and said, "The sect's competition is at hand. If you want, you can naturally avenge Junior Brother during the competition. That will be all. You may leave." Feng Zhen felt bitterness in his mouth. He was clearly the one who wanted to urge his master to deal with Zhang Yan, but in the end, how did it become him standing up for one Zhang and two Xian? But since his master had given this order, he had no choice but to obey. He accepted it helplessly and said, "I will obey master's orders." Go. Feng Zhen kowtowed a few times, but he still didn't dare to show a bitter expression on his face. He sighed inwardly and retreated with Xia Xiaoxin. The white-robed Taoist casually threw the letter away, and the paper turned into flying ash. He muttered to himself, "First-grade core formation. I'll pass the shell test first before talking about other things." With a wave of his sleeve, he turned into a ball of fire and smoke, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Target equals _blank. Chapter 282. Dao Book obtained true seal of mana. 5 days later, in the clear nether heavenly lake, an elder from the merit court came. This was an order from the sect leader to pass on a cultivation method to Zhang Yan. Originally, the elders in the merit court were all highly respected and had high seniority. If a disciple made a great contribution, even if they had to go to the merit court to exchange for a cultivation method or magic tool, they would still have to do something about it. Even if it was a true disciple, if there was the slightest bit of disrespect, they wouldn't be nice to them, and there was no reason for them to personally hand over the cultivation method. But this time, because the sect leader specially reminded them not to leak the matter of the cultivation method, they could only choose an elder to come here. Zhang Yan had already received the flying sword message earlier, so he was already waiting in the cave residence. When the person stepped into the main hall, he unexpectedly discovered that this person was actually an old acquaintance. He smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "I was wondering who it was, so it's Elder Gong. Please take a seat." Elder Gong laughed heartily and strode over, raising his hands to return the greeting, saying, "Junior brother Zhang, no need to be so polite, no need to be so polite." Zhang Yan took a look at him. After not seeing him for a long time, this elder's face was glowing, and his hair that was half black and half white seemed to have been dyed with a layer of oil wax. His spirit was so good that it couldn't be any better. After Zhang Yan greatly swept the face of the celestial sect of Xian family at the pill grading assembly, Elder Gong released all the anger that he had accumulated for over 100 years. He gained a lot of face, and his chest was incomparably comfortable. Therefore, after he learned of this matter, he took the initiative to volunteer and wanted to personally deliver the cultivation method bestowed by the sect into Zhang Yan's hands. The two of them exchanged greetings and sat down. Elder Gong said with a smile, "In the sect, there are 5 techniques and 3 scriptures, a total of 8 cultivation methods. In my opinion, the cultivation method that I'm giving to junior brother is profound and difficult. Since the founding of the Qinsang school, very few people have cultivated it. However, the sect leader has his own considerations, so it's not up to this half-dead old man like me to interfere. However, in cultivation, if there's anything you don't understand, you can go to the little cold realm. You'll gain something there." Zhang Yan said thoughtfully, "Little cold world?" Elder Gong's expression was serious. He nodded and said, "That's right, the little cold world." In Qinsang school, other than the Great Lake of Longyuan, there were several other small world abodes that had been opened up by the great sage of the past, and this small cold world was one of them. This was the place where the disciples of past generations died. When a cultivator's cultivation reaches a certain level, or when they feel that their lifespan is running out, and they attempt to break through, they can enter this place to cultivate. There was an unwritten rule in the little cold realm. If one wanted to comprehend the cultivation method of one's own sect in the realm, he or she had to write down his or her experience of cultivation in his or her abode and engrave it into words so that later generations could refer to it in detail. Elder Gong saw that this cultivation method was extremely difficult to practice, so he specifically told Zhang Yan that if he really had no clue, he could go to the little cold realm to look for the words left behind by the ancestors. Regardless of whether it was useful or not, it would at least be of some help. Zhang Yan thought about it and understood that this elder had good intentions. He stood up and cupped his hands in thanks. "Thank you for your advice, Elder Gong." "Not at all, not at all." Elder Gong also stood up with a smile. Zhang Yan was humble and polite. After his Dan reached the 1st grade, he didn't have any arrogance at all. This was very much to Elder Gong's liking. What he hated the most in his life was the arrogant attitude of the disciples of the Xianmen aristocratic families. He reached into his sleeve and took out a talisman. He handed it to Zhang Yan and said warmly, "Elder Yuan, who guards the little cold realm, has some friendship with me. If you have any questions, you can bring this talisman to me at any time. I will take you to see him." Zhang Yan accepted it generously and cupped his hands in respect. He smiled and said, "I dare not refuse an elder's gift. If I have time tomorrow, I will pay a visit to Elder Gong." Elder Gong laughed heartily again and said, "Good, good. Although there are no beautiful concubines in my humble abode, there are many spiritual fruits and fine wine. It is tasteless for me to drink alone. If you can come, I will open the door to welcome you. After chatting with Zhang Yan for a while, Elder Gong made an excuse to leave the jade box on the table with the excuse that he had something to do. He then took his leave. After Elder Gong left, Zhang Yan sat for a while and then picked up the jade box. He pinched his fingers and activated a spell. The array door in front of him immediately changed and revealed a square door. He stood up and took a step forward, landing in the main residence. He sat cross-legged on the jade couch and took the jade box in front of him. He opened the lid and revealed a jade scroll on the bright red silk. He smiled faintly and reached out to hold the item in his hand. With a slight urge, his spiritual chi probed into it. With just a turn, it turned into a glittering golden talisman and jumped into the space between his eyebrows. In an instant, countless talisman characters flashed through his mind. This cultivation method was called 9 Numbers Taisher Spiritual Treasure Mystic True Scripture. It was one of the 5 skills and 3 scriptures in Qinsang school. The 5 skills, in the 5 skills and 3 scriptures corresponded to the 5 elements. Some of the disciples in the school focused on one, while others focused on the other. The 3 scriptures didn't focus on the elements and could be learned by anyone. For example, Thousand Cloud Sword Scripture was a method that focused on the sword Tao. How to control the body's dharma power was all for the sake of the sword. This 9 primordial numinous treasure mystic true scripture was passed down by the founder of the Dark Azure sect. It was one of the few superior techniques that could deduce the true seal of dharmic power and the great Tao mystic art on its own. After a cultivator reached the core formation stage, the first step was to devour the essence of heaven and earth, the essence of all living things, and the earth-vein evil spirit to refine the power of the core until it couldn't grow anymore. At this time, one needed to break through the shell barrier and step into the second realm. After reaching this realm, one needed to condense the Dharma Power True Seal. This seal was the key for a cultivator to form the nascent soul in the future. If the power of the core wasn't enough, the aura would disperse and it wouldn't be enough to stabilize the true seal. This was also why it was impossible for the disciples of the lower 3 ranks to advance further in their lives. Condensing the Dharma Power True Seal was originally a big difficulty, but if a sect had been passed down for thousands of years and the master and disciple had the same cultivation method, then the elder could pass a True Seal seed to the junior disciple. The disciple could use this to condense the Dharma power and save a lot of time. However, because this True Seal seed was given by the elder, it couldn't be completely compatible with the disciple. Therefore, after the disciple's Dharma power was stable, he still needed to adjust his chi and slowly dissolve the elder's true seal. During this process, if the pale evil spirit contained in the true seal couldn't be completely converted into his own, it would cause the pale evil spirit to leak out. This was also the reason why when Zhang Yan met Elder Sun on Yingluo Island, Elder Sun's movements seemed to shake the mountains and the earth as he walked. This was because he was dispersing the baleful aura that he could not absorb into his body. However, the celestial sect was different. The elders and the disciples of the younger generation were connected by blood. If the cultivation method was the same, and the quality of the pill was similar, then the true seal seed that was passed down would be almost perfect. The amount of evil spirit wasted would naturally be less, and as a result, their future achievements would be higher. In this aspect, the celestial sect was slightly better than the master and disciple. As for Zhang Yan, when he reached the first grade of the pill, there was almost no one who could help him, so he could only rely on himself to condense the true seal of Fa Li. As soon as he returned to the sect, he set his sights on this 9 primal beginning spiritual treasure mysterious scripture. What Zhang Yan was most afraid of was not having a clue when he was cultivating and not knowing where to start. However, with this cultivation method, he could point out the direction of the great Tao, knowing where the road under his feet came from and where he had to go. It was such a simple step, but the result was like heaven and earth. The reason why there were so few people who practiced this cultivation method was because it was not easy to practice. Those who practiced this method needed to be able to deduce the eroded runes and explain the principles. However, there were many who understood the eroded runes in the world, but those who were truly proficient in it and were willing to immerse themselves in it were few and far between. As a result, many people died at this stage. However, this was only the first step. The second step was to deduce how to condense the true seal of Fa Li. This process would take an unknown amount of time, especially if one took the wrong path, then all the previous efforts would be wasted, and one would need to start all over again. If one's luck was bad, then even if they practiced until they died of old age, they might not be able to master it. As a result, apart from those with great willpower, perseverance, and wisdom, most people stopped in front of this scripture. However, Zhang Yan was not afraid. With this cultivation method to point out the path and a clear direction, he could use the broken jade to deduce the minor details. The two complemented each other and complemented each other. It was as if it was tailor-made for him. However, right now, what he needed to solve the most was the shell barrier. This was the barrier that prevented core transformation cultivators from achieving the Great Tao. The higher the rank of a core transformation cultivator, the more solid this barrier was, and the more difficult it was to break through. Normally, it was the easiest for a core transformation cultivator to break through this barrier. However, they would be stuck on the true seal of Fa Li. Therefore, even if they managed to break through, it would be useless. For the rest of their lives, they would linger at the second tier of core transformation and would never be able to advance. The middle 3 grades were slightly more difficult, and the upper 3 grades were the most difficult to achieve. Zhang Yan becoming a first-grade pill was naturally even more difficult. This was also the wonder of the creation of all things. The world had its own destiny, and there was nothing perfect and flawless in this world. However, if he could break through the shackles of this world, then his future achievements would be far above others. Zhang Yan smiled confidently. In his heart, however, a feeling of, if I can't do it, who else can? Now that he had the 9 primordial spiritual treasures mystic true scripture, and the broken jade in his hand, if even he could not find the way to break through the shell barrier, then no one in this world could succeed. At this moment, the small mirror in the pot shook, and a voice came out. Master, outside the mountain gate, there is a cultivator who claims to be from the North Star sect. He wants to see you. North Star sect. Zhang Yan waved his hand, and the figure of the person appeared on the mirror. He took a look and saw that the cultivator was about 30 years old with a short beard. He was standing patiently in front of the mountain gate, and behind him were dozens of people. They were either female servants or strong men. He smiled. So it's Yan Jinping, fellow cultivator Yan. Mirror spirit, invite him into the main hall. Order Shang Shang to greet him first. I will meet him later. Target equals _blank. Chapter 283. Date, October 7th. For more interesting novels, download please go April, comma. After the news of Zhang Yan achieving the first grade of Dantian spread throughout Donghua, Elder Yan naturally heard about it. He had an alliance with Zhang Yan in private, so he had to express his gratitude. Hence, he immediately ordered his grandson to bring many congratulatory gifts to congratulate him. After Yan Jinping entered the main hall, there was a beauty named Yu Ji who came to serve tea. He picked up the teacup and took a sip. He felt the fragrance lingering on his teeth and cheeks, refreshing his heart and spleen. His eyes also brightened, as if there was a pair of soft hands gently stirring the spiritual vigor in his body, regulating his qi and meridians. After a round in his meridians, he suddenly felt refreshed. Even though he was used to drinking the world's famous tea, he could not help but praise, "Good tea." "What's the name of this tea?" The beauties on both sides giggled and said, "I don't know the name of this tea. I only know that it's a private collection by the master. You can ask the master later." This tea was left by Guo Songyao in the past. There was a lot of it, so Zhang Yan used it to entertain the guests. The tea that the people in the grotto heaven drank on a daily basis was naturally extraordinary. It was no wonder that Yan Jinping exclaimed. Yan Jinping took another sip and nodded. After putting down the teacup, he looked around. He was envious. After all, it was a grotto heaven residence. The abundance of spiritual vigor was incomparable to other places. It was even above the cave where his grandfather, Yan Jingting, cultivated. Previously, he tried his best to befriend Zhang Yan, and it was indeed a good move. After waiting for a moment, he suddenly heard a loud laugh. "Brother Yan, why are you here today?" Yan Jinping looked up and saw Zhang Yan coming out from the inner hall with a tall boy in his teens. He quickly stood up with a smile on his face. He cupped his hands and said, "Brother Zhang has achieved the first grade of Dantian. I've heard of such a supreme achievement, so I'm here to congratulate you on the order of my ancestor." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Elder Yan, you don't have to be so polite. Come, Brother Yan, please sit." Yan Jinping also knew that Zhang Yan's status in Qinsang school was different. It was incomparable to the past. With his current status, he probably wouldn't have the qualifications to sit down and talk with him in another situation. However, he was here on behalf of his grandfather today, so he didn't have to worry so much. After sitting down, he took out an item from his sleeve. He respectfully brought it in front of Zhang Yan and said, "This is just a small gift. I hope senior brother will kindly accept it." Zhang Yan didn't reject it out of courtesy. He casually glanced at it. Seeing that the gifts were all servants, as well as a few cups of true sand that could absorb essence, when he saw the last item, his eyes lit up and he sighed, "Elder Yan is very thoughtful." Yan Jinping smiled and said, "My ancestors said that this isn't anything special. Senior brother has his own seniors in the sect. This thing is just the icing on the cake for senior brother. It won't help much." Zhang Yan smiled faintly. This thing wasn't a small gift, but a Taoist book that recorded the various comprehensions and experiences of all the core formation cultivators in the Beichen sect when they broke through the Shell Gate over the past several generations. He secretly praised Elder Yan in his heart, admiring his shrewdness and accurate eyesight. Elder Yan knew what he needed and sent it. It was like sending a pillow when he was sleepy. Even though he had other ways to think of a solution, this kindness made him feel comfortable. He said, "Brother Yan, please go back and tell Elder Yan that I, Zhang Yan, will remember his kindness." Yan Jinping showed a very happy smile, knowing that today's trip had been successful. He hurriedly said, "Senior brother, you are too kind." At this moment, he suddenly patted his forehead as if he suddenly remembered something. He said, "I almost forgot, there was a person outside the door who came with me. He said he wanted to see senior brother. Seriously speaking, that person is from the same sect as senior brother. He said he wanted to see senior brother for something, but he was afraid that it would be rude to come here rashly, so he asked me to pass the message. Just now, I only cared about talking to senior brother. In the blink of an eye, I have forgotten him." Zhang Yan looked at Yan Jinping deeply and said, "Since he is from the same sect as me and is an old friend of Brother Yan, then please come in and see him." He waved his hand and the formation door in the main hall opened. Two UG beauties bowed and left with the order. Not long after, they came in with an old man. This person's cultivation was not high. He was only a Ming Qi cultivator. He had a head full of white hair, a kind face, and healthy steps. As soon as he saw Zhang Yan, he dared to come up and greet him. He said in fear and trepidation, "Master Zhang, this old man, Yang Fenghe, greets you." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows when he heard Yang Kai address him as such, vaguely guessing the other party's origins, nodded and said, "I heard from fellow Taoist Yan that fellow Taoist Yang is also a disciple of my sect. May I know which cave mansion you are cultivating in?" Yang Fenghe blushed and said, "I'm ashamed. I was only bestowed some techniques by a master in the sect and have been studying and cultivating in private. I've wasted half my life and am about to die, but I haven't had the fortune to be a disciple of any master. Now I'm only entrusted by a few elders of the Leaping Heavens Pavilion to take care of the affairs inside and outside the 9 cities. When he said this, Zhang Yan understood and said lightly, "So it's the chief steward of the 9 cities. I've been disrespectful. May I know why you've come to my place?" He felt a little strange in his heart. Now that he was cultivating in the clear darkness heavenly lake, other than occasionally going to the Dan Ding courtyard, he had almost no contact with the sect. Although the Spirit Page Island was still in his hands, it had long been closed and only a few 5-colored spirit lizards were left to guard the mountain gate. Yang Fenghe hesitated for a while and then sighed. He cupped his hands and said, "Master Zhang, although I'm the commander of the 9 cities, there are still sect rules. I hope that Master Zhang can choose a few good disciples to go over so that I can answer to the elders of the Ming Temple." After saying this, he bowed 3 times to Zhang Yan and finally bowed all the way to the ground. He refused to get up for a long time. Zhang Yan thought for a while and understood the purpose of this person's visit. Now that he was a core transformation cultivator, according to the rules of the Qinsang school, he should start to accept disciples. Although he already had 2 disciples in the sect, they were found by him and not arranged by the sect. When the disciples of the Qinsang school, especially the disciples of the master and the disciples, reached the core transformation realm, they had to choose disciples and teach them. The disciples were chosen from the 9 cities on the back of the black tortoise. The population of these 9 cities added up to 2 million people, and they were all relatives and friends of the disciples of the master and the disciples. For tens of thousands of years, although some of the disciples of the Qinsang school had died long ago, their relatives still took root in the sect and spread their branches. Because they lived in the Great Longyan swamp, they often breathed in fresh air and trained their bodies. Over the years, their bodies were far stronger than those of ordinary people outside the sect. Even some of the disciples in the sect chose to reincarnate here after they were killed. Most of the disciples that the master and the disciples accepted were chosen from among them. However, the master chose the disciple, and the disciple also chose the master. After so many years, there were naturally many noble sects and families in the 9 cities. Many people even became the disciples of famous teachers and had endless glory. As long as one person in the family entered the path, the whole family would benefit. Now that the news of Zhang Yan's first-grade core had spread throughout the sect, many people had set their eyes on him. In the eyes of those big families, Zhang Yan's path of cultivation was smooth, and it was only a matter of time before he achieved yuanying. Therefore, they were all secretly thinking about how to climb up to this big backer. If they could let their own children and nephews become his disciples, not to mention 1,000 years, they would definitely be able to ensure the prosperity of their entire family within 400 or 500 years. Therefore, many of the big families in the 9 cities had prepared a lot of gifts and begged Yang Fenghe, just to be able to send their children and nephews to Zhang Yan as disciples. Although Yang Fenghe ruled the 9 cities and was incomparably glorious in front of the big families in the cities, in the eyes of the inner sect disciples of the Qinsang school, he was nothing. He wanted to see Zhang Yan, but there was no one to introduce him, and he suddenly came knocking on his door. As a clear chi cultivator, he could not enter the mountain gate of Clear Nether Lake at all. In a hurry, he also went around to visit relatives and friends, looking for a way, but it just so happened that Yan Zhenhua came to Qinsang school, found his door, and asked to take away a few disciples. It seemed that this Beichen sect was equivalent to the disciples of sects that were on good terms with Qinsang school, and also came to the 9 cities to choose some people that Qinsang school did not like to take back as disciples. Usually, he dealt with Yang Fenghe, so they had a bit of a friendship. This time, Yan Jinping did not immediately go to Clear Nether Lake to see Zhang Yan, but came here because he was a cautious person, and decided to first find out what the situation in Qinsang school was like after Zhang Yan achieved core, so that if he was not careful, he would get mixed up in some mud, which would not be good. After he and Yang Fenghe met, they naturally chatted for a while and naturally talked about this matter. Yang Fenghe did not expect that Yan Jinping was actually old friends with Zhang Yan, so he was immediately overjoyed, and immediately asked him to introduce a few people, but this caused the latter to look at him in surprise. In fact, Yang Fenghe also felt embarrassed. He wanted to see the true teachings of his own sect, but he still needed the help of another sect's disciple, which was really embarrassing. But at this moment, he did not care so much. If he missed this opportunity, he did not know when he would be able to see Zhang Yan again. Others might be afraid of the sect's rules, but Yang Fenghe understood that people like Zhang Yan, why would they care about such things? In the end, if they pursued the matter, the blame would still fall on him, so his attitude was very low, and he almost begged Zhang Yan to take a few disciples. After Zhang Yan figured out many things, he smiled and said, "In that case, I will not make things difficult for you. I can send 2 people to my sect as registered disciples, but you are not allowed to choose bad ones." He reached out and pointed at Tian Kuan, who was standing beside him, and said, "This is my second disciple, Tian Kuan. The person you send over must at least have this kind of aptitude." Yang Fenghe was able to promote the disciples of the master and disciple line, so his eyesight was also very good, and he was especially good at distinguishing auras. After looking at Tian Kun a few times, he sighed with a bitter face and said, "Master Zhang's disciple is outstanding, and his feet are strong and powerful. He has the appearance of a dragon and turtle. I think he must be a great cultivator in his previous life. Forgive me for being incompetent, but I really can't choose such a good disciple." "Oh." Zhang Yan looked at him in surprise. He originally wanted to test this person's eyesight. He could see through Tian Kuan's aptitude, but he did not expect this person to really have some ability. He nodded and was about to speak, but suddenly thought of something and asked, "Let me ask you, Ning Chong, senior brother Xian Ning reached Dan a step earlier than me, so he must have accepted a disciple now, right?" Yang Fenghe quickly nodded and said, yes, Master Ning also accepted a disciple 5 years ago." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "In that case, send me a disciple, and his aptitude will be as good as senior brother Ning." He also said this casually, and did not pay too much attention to it. Yang Fenghe's face stiffened, but he had already looked back at Zhang Yan once, so at this time, he did not dare to refute. His eyebrows were knitted together, and he lowered his head, gritted his teeth and said, "Yes, I will definitely make Master satisfied." For more interesting novels, download please go April, Target =_. Chapter 284. Practicing Qi with Divine Sand. Several days later, an elder from the Spring Heaven Pavilion arrived at the bright nether heavenly lake. He was ordered to deliver the core formation cultivators of the Qinsang school wearing hats, robes, spirit talismans, sleeves, and jade accessories. Along with them were the 5 elemental divine sand for core formation cultivators to absorb. In total, 38 ships were filled. These 5 elemental divine sand were born from the baleful aura in the sect, so they couldn't be compared to the divine sand of the mortal world. Zhang Yan ordered Lu Yenny to greet the elder while he waved his sleeve. A wisp of smoke flew out and picked up all 38 ships of divine sand. Then, he landed in the main residence. The attendant from the Ascension Heavens Pavilion was speechless. When he heard that Master Zhang had pulled out the 9 whales during the pill grading assembly, he had only sighed with emotion. He didn't have any idea what was going on. Now that he saw Master Zhang take away the 38 boatloads of divine sand with a raise of his hand, he was naturally shocked. Originally, he was a bit dissatisfied with Zhang Yan sending only 1 disciple to greet him. But now, he put away this thought and didn't dare to underestimate Lu Yenny. Zhang Yan returned to the main residence and sat down on the jade couch. He made a hand seal and circulated the baleful aura. A dense mist slowly spread out and covered the ship of 5 elemental divine sand in front of him. He wantonly stirred it. Not long after, the divine sand was broken into countless fine powder-like black dust that fell to the ground. There was also a wisp of grayish essence that drifted out. About half an hour later, he collected the smoke and pointed at the air. The countless wisps of essence scattered in the air condensed into a fist-sized cloud of mist on his fingertip. He opened his mouth and swallowed it. His gold core trembled and rotated a few times before refining it. He waved his sleeve and picked up the next ship of divine sand. Then, he continued to do the same thing as before. An entire day passed. After he finished refining the 38 boatloads of divine sand, he silently calculated in his heart. After absorbing so much essence, it was equivalent to him meditating in this cave for 7 or 8 days. The amount of evil pill he refined was so little that it was almost negligible. If these 38 boatloads of divine sand were given to a lower-grade core transformation disciple, it would take them half a year to refine. If it were given to a middle-grade core transformation cultivator, it would take them at least a month, but for Zhang Yan, it would only take him a day to refine all of it. Even for cultivators of the 2nd and 3rd grade, this amount of divine sand was like trying to put out a burning cart of firewood with a cup of water. It was far from enough. He thought for a moment, then took out a jade bottle from his sleeve, pulled out the stopper, and poured it over the mouth of the bottle. A pill the size of a longan rolled out, as white as jade and as white as frost, emitting a strong spiritual aura. He raised his head and swallowed one pill. Then, he closed his eyes and slowly circulated the medicinal efficacy. After a moment, he opened his eyes again. The efficacy was many times better than the essence he absorbed just now. This was a pill refined by Zhou Chengju using the spiritual aura of plants and wood, and it could also help a core transformation cultivator's cultivation. However, this pill also had its drawbacks. These exotic flowers and plants grew very slowly. Even the medicine garden in the Danding courtyard could only produce one batch every 3 months. Not to mention, they had to send a lot of them to the various islands and mansions. Naturally, they couldn't give all of them to Zhang Yan. If it was an ordinary disciple, it would be enough, but he was a first-grade core transformation cultivator, so it was far from enough. Zhang Yan thought to himself that it would be great if he could plant an earth terminus in his cave abode. All of the 5-element divine sand was nurtured and cultivated from the baleful qi of the earth vein, but the most essential portion of it had already been taken away by someone a long time ago. For example, the pot of true sand that Zheng Hongtu bestowed during the pill grading conference had been carefully selected from countless divine sand. These true sand were all given to the direct disciples of the sect. As for the leftover divine sand, which was of lower quality and had more impurities, they were distributed to the other disciples. The predecessors planted the trees, and the posterity enjoyed the shade. Planting an earth fiend was not something that could be done in a day, and it required tens or even hundreds of years before it could be nurtured. The higher quality earth fiends required even more time. The cave abodes of the Heaven's Abode Masters in the sect also had many high-quality evil spirit, but they were given to their own disciples, so they naturally wouldn't take them out and share them with others. Unfortunately, Gui Tsongyao was the Heaven's Abode Master, and because he didn't have any disciples by his side, he didn't need any evil spirit, so there was no such thing in the clear Serenity Lake. If Zhang Yan only relied on this divine sand and meditated in the cave, absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, with his Heaven's Abode Master, he might be able to increase the power of the Dan to the limit in 100 years. But if that was the case, his peers would have left him far behind, and then the next generation of disciples would rise up. How would he have a place to stand? So this method wasn't feasible. Actually, there was another way, and that was to make a great contribution to the sect, and then he could go to the Merit Courtyard to exchange for a lot of true sand. But if he did that, he would waste a lot of time searching for these things, which he didn't want. In the sect, the only people who didn't have to worry about these things and focused on cultivation were the top 10 disciples. Behind each of them was a force supporting them, and everything was done by others, so there was no need for them to worry about themselves. Just this benefit alone was enough to leave countless fellow disciples behind. No matter how great one's natural talent was, it was impossible for them to contend against them. Zhang Yan understood that at the end of the day, it was to see if there was anyone supporting the disciples behind them, and it was impossible for him to catch up to them by himself. According to the current situation in the sect, the masters didn't want him to jump out and cause trouble before the competition, so they naturally wouldn't help him. But Zhang Yan had already expected this, and he thought to himself, looks like it's time to meet that person. After making up his mind, he rolled up his sleeves and left the cave, flying towards the Qinsang school. Not long after he left, a jet-black profound light flew over from outside the heavenly lake, and there were two women standing on it. One of them was Luo Xiao, and the other was around the age of 30 with a beautiful appearance. She was Madame Chen, that Chen she had brought back from the Southliang Kingdom. Madame Chen rode a cloud all the way here, and only now did she realize the ability of the gods. She combed her hair while gazing at the indistinct and enormous figure that shot into the sky, and she was filled with fascination. She couldn't help but ask. "Fairy Luo, this place is probably not far from where my son cultivates, right?" Luo Xiao chuckled and pressed down on the back of Madame Chen's hand as she said, "I told you a long time ago, there's no need for Madame to call me that. I'm only a maidservant by Master's side. Tian Kun is Master's disciple, so Madame can just call me Luo Nyangzi." "That's right, the heavenly lake is just 50 kilometers away." Madame Chen was also a discerning person. She saw that Luo Xiao was enchanting and charming, and had the ability to fly in the sky and burrow into the ground. She also spoke boldly and did not hold back. This time, she was even arranged by Zhang Yan to come and fetch her. Her status was definitely not as simple as a maidservant. She might even be a concubine or Taoist companion of the Taoist priest. In fact, Luo Xiao also admired her in her heart. If it was an ordinary woman, not to mention flying over the cloudy mountain, even if she reached a high place, she would have already fainted from fright. But this Madame Chen, other than feeling a little uncomfortable earlier, spoke and laughed naturally along the way, without the slightest hint of panic. Just this calmness alone made Luo Xiao think highly of her. 100 miles passed by in a hurry. When the two of them got close, they saw that Zhaoyu Mountain pierced through the sky like a pillar supporting the heavens. Even though Madame Chen was born in a wealthy family and was experienced and knowledgeable, she was still shocked by the magnificence of the heaven and earth. Her voice could not help but be a little softer as she said timidly, This is the place where my son cultivates?" Luo Xiao smiled and said, "That's right, Madame's judgment is accurate. This is the place." Madame Chen looked around and sighed, "This mountain is so vast, this Qinsang school is really a holy land for celestials." Luo Xiao suddenly covered her mouth and laughed, "Madame is wrong. This Xiaoyu mountain is my master's place of cultivation. That Qinsang school is still very far from here." Madame Chen was shocked and her heart was deeply shaken. Such a magnificent place actually belonged to that Taoist Zhang alone. Luo Xiao looked at the faraway mountain and her beautiful eyes were full of splendor. This time, not only did she bring Madame Chen back, she also took back the Shell King that was hidden outside. She was going to put it in the Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake. This way, the sect would not be lacking in resources. Back then, Zhang Yan promised to help her achieve Dao. As Zhang Yan's cultivation advanced day by day, she also felt that it was not a fleeting thought. When they were close to the mountain gate, she suddenly thought of something and hurriedly put her hand into her pouch, took out a pill, and said, "Madame Chen, the cold air in the abode is deep. Take this pill and it will help you resist a little." Madame Chen thanked her and took it. When the medicinal pill entered her stomach, she felt a warm aura flowing through her limbs and meridians. She couldn't help but be amazed. Luo Xiao's return to the residence was naturally unobstructed. After opening the formation door, she arrived at the mountain gate. She looked around and pulled a maid over to ask, "Where is Master?" The maid lowered her head and said, reporting to Lady Luo, "Master went out a moment ago. Do you want me to call Lady Shang over?" Luo Xiao waved her hand and said, "No need. Go to the door and say that I have brought Kun's mother and want him to come out and meet me." The maid obeyed and left. After a while, there was a series of hurried footsteps. It was Tian Kun who ran out in a hurry. When he saw Madame Chen, he was overjoyed and said, "Mother." Madame Chen was also happy to see her son, but she couldn't help but feel her eyes warm up. She choked and said, "My son." Madame Chen took a step forward, but just as she was about to step forward, her body swayed. Tian Kun saw this and jumped in fright. He hurried over to support her and said anxiously, "Mother, what's wrong? Are you sick?" Madam Chen clenched her teeth and her body shivered. She said, I'm fine, I'm fine. I'm just a little cold. Luo Xiao frowned and took Madam Chen's wrist. She muttered to herself for a moment and said apologetically, it's this servant's negligence. Kun, the cold air here is deep. Your mother shouldn't stay here for long. Looks like we need to go to the 9 cities to settle down. It turned out that the cold air of the clear nether heavenly lake came from the underground cave 10,000 feet deep. If one wasn't a cultivator, they wouldn't be able to endure it. If it wasn't for Madam Chen taking the pill earlier, she would have frozen to death on the spot. Tian Kun said seriously, Mother, I'll bring you there now. Luo Xiao reached out and knocked on his head. She said with a smile, you haven't been to the 9 cities yet, right? I'll go call Yan Yi over and let her bring you there. Tian Kun said loudly, Uncle Master Luo, my teacher said that under us, the elders of the sect will never do the things that the disciples can do. If I can't do such a small thing, what's the point of cultivating? Target equals _blank. Chapter 285. Since Tian Kun insisted, and with the rules of master and disciple, Luo Xiao couldn't force him and could only let him go. But she was still worried, so before the two of them left, she reminded him again and gave him a lot of spirit shells before letting him go. After the mother and son left, she thought to herself, Master's disciple is very precious, if something happens to him, how am I going to explain it to him? Never mind, let him go first. Later I will go inform Yan Yi, let her secretly follow and take care of him. She twisted her waist and went into the inner hall. After taking 2 steps, she shook her hand, and a strange python came out from her sleeve. It rolled on the ground and turned into an ugly child. He stood up and looked around. His eyes widened as he said, Is this Master's cave abode? Luo Xiao smiled and said, Don't look anymore, you'll be staying here in the future, there will be plenty of opportunities to roam around. Come with me, I'll bring you to see someone. Tian Kun's cultivation hadn't reached a certain level yet, so he didn't have a flying instrument with him. After exiting the cave through the formation door, he could only walk south. He was very filial, he carried Madam Chen on his back, but his feet were like an arrow flying, crossing mountains and ridges as if he was walking on flat ground. Madam Chen said, My son, do you have anyone from the same sect? How did they treat you? Tian Kun was stunned, I have a senior apprentice sister, even though she can't compare to mother, she treats me very well. Madam Chen nodded and said, You're cultivating under Zhang Daozhang, don't have any ideas and don't fight with senior apprentice sister. Even if senior apprentice sister says something to you, don't argue back. Also, your martial aunt Luo is a capable woman, if there's anything you don't understand, you can ask her. If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask her, do you hear me? Tian Kun nodded his head heavily and said, Mother is right, I'll remember it in my heart. Madam Chen knew that this child of hers always did whatever she said. Hearing him agree, she lovingly patted his young but broad shoulders, feeling very gratified. Tian Kun was a Taoist cultivator and the reincarnation of a greater demon. When he passed through the forest, all the beasts, insects, and birds avoided him. Thus, he was able to pass through without any obstruction. He climbed over the little wave mountain and saw a vast plain in front of him. He had never traveled so far in his life. He was in high spirits and walked faster and faster. In the end, Lady Chen could only hear the whistling of the wind in her ears, as if she was riding on a galloping horse, and there was not even a trace of sweat on Tian Kun's back. She was happy and surprised, and said, My son has really grown up. After traveling for another few hundred li. In front of him was a vast river that flowed endlessly. There was a ferry on the shore, and many people were sitting on the boat with their luggage in their hands. Before Tian Kun came out, he had heard from Luo Xiao that he was going to enter the Great Dragon Lake. Naturally he wanted to take a boat at the ferry, therefore he carried Madam Chen on his back. He excitedly ran up and dashed onto the ship. But suddenly his feet shook and the boat tilted to the side. Immediately there were cries of alarm. He was anxious and instinctively took a few steps forward, and the boat stabilized again. The old boatman only saw a blur in front of him and saw a teenager boarding the boat, almost capsizing the boat. He secretly wiped away his cold sweat. He was here to welcome and send people off, so of course he had good eyesight. He couldn't say anything to reprimand him, and could only say with a bitter smile, "Little brother, you have to sit tight. You have great strength, don't trample this old man's boat to pieces." Madam Chen patted her son reproachfully. Tian Kun was embarrassed and apologized profusely. He carefully put Madam Chen down. The passengers on the boat were not ordinary people. Even though they were frightened, they quickly calmed down. They took a look at the mother and son and knew that they couldn't afford to offend them, so they sat tight again. Madam Chen said, "May I know how much the boatman can ferry?" The old boatman laughed aloud and said, "If this madam is willing to give, just a few copper coins will do." Madam Chen thought for a moment and ordered Tian Kun to give him a string of copper coins. The old boatman didn't even look at it and stuffed it into his bosom. When the boat came again, he said, "Everyone, please sit tight." He untied the rope and shook the oars. The boat swung out of the ferry and went down the river. Every other day, the boat would go ashore to buy food. It traveled and stopped. About 10 days later, they arrived at an island in the middle of the river. The Black Tortoise continent was already faintly in sight. After they went ashore, the mother and son took their leave of the boatman and wanted to change to another boat. Before they boarded the boatman swept a few glances at them. He saw that Tian Kun's clothing was not something an ordinary person could wear. He smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "May I know which island and which courtyard are you two esteemed guests from?" Tian Kun was still a child. Ever since he was born, he had never spoken to outsiders. His mind was pure, so he thought for a moment and felt that Clear Nether Lake was neither an island nor a courtyard. He answered honestly, "Neither." "Neither?" The boatman was stunned. His originally warm expression turned cold. He waved his sleeves and said, "There are a few empty seats in the lower cabin. Go and squat there." Ever since Madam Chen entered this great lake of Dragon Abyss, she saw beautiful celestial sceneries everywhere. Even though Clear Nether Lake's dojo was vast, it was not within the sect. Therefore, she couldn't figure out what position Zhang Yan had in the sect and if he had offended someone. She was born in a family of officials and was used to scheming since young. Now that she had just arrived, she always had her guard up against others. She didn't dare to casually mention Zhang Yan's name. She was afraid that if any celestial elder in the sect didn't get along with Zhang Yan, it wouldn't matter if she was punished, but if her son was harmed, it wouldn't be redeemable even if she died 10,000 times. Therefore, she and Tian Kun went to the lower cabin as instructed. Even though it was dark and damp, it was still habitable. The journey was considered smooth. They boarded the boat at noon and arrived at the Black Tortoise continent at the end of the 5 o'clock. According to what Luo Xiao had told them previously, they had to first go to the highest building in the city, the Hall of Tranquility, to register and then settle down. However, when they hurried there, they discovered that the steward had already left. When they asked around, they said that they would have to wait until tomorrow morning. Just now, someone came. The mother and son discussed for a while and could only find an inn to stay at first. They were on the boat for half a day and didn't get any food or water. Tian Kun was naturally fine and acted as if nothing had happened. Madam Chen, however, was a little thirsty. She saw that there were people selling plums on the street and couldn't help but salivate. She said, "My son, help mother buy some plums." "Okay, mother, wait for me." Tian Kun immediately agreed. He tiptoed to take a look and saw that there were a lot of people surrounding to buy plums. He squeezed over by himself. He hadn't even taken a few steps when he heard a cry of alarm from the crowd, followed by a flurry of activity. A red-maned dragon horse galloped over from the other end of the street. The horse was about 10 feet tall, and there was smoke rising from its 4 hooves. It was half a foot above the ground, and it was a majestic steed. On its back was a beautiful young girl with skin whiter than snow. Her face was filled with panic and she was desperately pulling on the reins, trying to stop the galloping horse. However, the horse didn't listen to her, and along the way, the people on the streets screamed and dodged. The horse ran rampantly, and the more it galloped, the faster it charged forward. Madame Chen was standing in the crowd, and when she saw the crowd suddenly dispersed, she then noticed the galloping horse. Her body was slightly tired and naturally her reaction was slower. When she wanted to dodge, it was already too late and her face couldn't help but turn pale. Tian Kun turned his head and looked. In a moment of desperation, he didn't have time to think and jumped in front of the horse's head. He kicked the horse's knee and with a "kacha" sound, the horse's leg was broken. The dragon horse let out a mournful cry, its front hooves went soft, and it fell to the ground. The girl on the horse also let out a cry of surprise. Fortunately, she was agile and nimble. She borrowed the force of the fall to flip forward and landed steadily on the ground. She didn't look at the horse first, but turned her head to look at Tian Kun. She ran over and said with concern, "Little brother, are you all right?" Tian Kun snorted and turned around. He supported Madame Chen and said, "Mother, how are you?" Madame Chen was shocked and came up to hold his arm. She looked him up and down and said, "Kun, are you hurt?" Tian Kun shook his head and said, "I'm fine." When the young lady heard him say that, she also felt relieved. In the 9 cities, there were some people who were born with strong muscles, and there were also some people who had received guidance from immortal masters in their sections. So it wasn't surprising that he could kick the dragon horse. But the young lady looked at the horse with great pity and bit her lower lip. She couldn't help but feel distressed and said, "Tomorrow I am going to be apprenticed to a master. This dragon horse was originally a greeting gift for my master, but I didn't think it would be injured here. This is bad, this is bad." While she was feeling sorry for herself, she heard the sound of horse hooves coming from the other end of the street. A tall and straight man in white rode up to her and then jumped off the horse. He walked over with a cold face and frowned as he scolded, "If you don't know how to ride it, then don't ride it. Why are you trying to be brave? I spent a lot of effort to find this precious furnace dragon horse for you. It was originally meant for you to be apprenticed to a master, but you ruined it like this. With your rough temperament, if you become apprenticed to immortal master Zhang, you will be kicked out sooner or later. At that time, you will lose face for my Wang family." The young lady puffed her cheeks and said, "What's so great about it? Second brother, you just didn't catch Grandpa Yang's eye. Is it worth scolding me like this?" The man in white suddenly became angry and said, "You're rebelling, and you still dare to talk back. It seems that you can't go to immortal Master Zhang's place." The young lady turned her head and muttered in a low voice, "If you don't want to worship, then don't. It's your turn to go." The man in white was so angry that his whole body trembled. He stomped his feet and said, "Get back home. You're not allowed to eat today, and you're not allowed to go out for the next few days, lest you embarrass yourself outside." Seeing that his sister still didn't care, he said bitterly, "If you continue to be like this, you will accidentally make immortal Master Zhang unhappy. That will bring harm to our whole family." Just as he was about to scold her a few more times, he glanced to the side and saw Tian Kun supporting Madame Chen to leave, so he shouted coldly, "You over there, stop right there. Do you think you can just leave after hurting my Wang family's horse?" At the same time, Zhang Yan flew far away. His body turned into a cloud and flew all the way to the west of the Great Dragon Lake. When he flew over Jiangben Island, he took a quick look and immediately looked away. He sped up a little, and before long, he had already arrived in front of the little vast Sea Shoming Palace. From afar, a female cultivator flew over on a red-crowned crane. She cupped her hands and said, "Which senior brother is here?" Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Zhang Yan, came from the clear serenity heavenly lake, and specially came to pay a visit to immortal Peng." Chapter 286. join hands to seize the throne. Hearing the name of Zhang Yan, the female cultivator was slightly moved. She looked at him carefully and said politely, "Senior brother, please wait a moment. I will go and report to Jinren." Zhang Yan nodded his head, and the female cultivator went inside. He pressed down on the cloud and landed in front of the palace gate. Many of the maids on the steps in front of the gate had just heard him introduce himself, and now they knew that this young Taoist was the person who had achieved first-grade Dan. Their beautiful eyes all looked over curiously. Zhang Yan did not pay attention to them. He stood still and carefully looked at the famous palace in front of him. After all, this was the place where the people of Dongtian lived. There were exotic flowers and grasses everywhere. The dew in front of the eaves was like a hanging jade curtain. The light of treasures and auspicious air were like pearls carrying the moon. He could smell the fragrance and hear the clear sound. Outside the palaces and pavilions, green wands and yellow cranes danced in the air. Above the roof tiles, there were hundreds of rare birds circling in the air. Compared to the desolate scene 20 years ago, it was already very different. Not long after, the female cultivator flew out on a cloud. She bowed to him and said with a smile, "Jinren invites senior brother Zhang to meet him in the hall." Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Thank you." After the female cultivators left, he shook his sleeve and followed them inside. After arriving at the inner hall, he walked down a corridor. After passing through 9 layers of palaces, he arrived at a dazzling temple that was made of gold and made of jade. The temple was decorated in silver and dazzling colors. The female cultivator stroked her hair and said with a smile, "Senior brother, please wait here. Jinren will come to see you later." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and stood in the hall with his hands behind his back. The reason why he came to find Jinren Peng was that he wanted the Jinren Peng to help him cultivate and support him to become one of the top 10 disciples. This wasn't something he did on a whim, but something he had planned out beforehand. Jinren Peng had been in the Dongtian position for less than 20 years. It could be said that he had the weakest foundation among the people of the 10 Dongtian. He did not have time to support his own disciples. Moreover, Zhang Yan also noticed a detail. Although this enlightened master was from the Peng clan, none of his disciples were from the Peng clan. He didn't even have a single disciple from an aristocratic family. The only disciple he was most proud of was Qin Nan. Now, in Qinsang school, every direct disciple of the heavenly abode was at least at the Golden Core realm, and they were far above the other disciples in terms of temperament and cultivation. Sun Jinren was the last to achieve the grotto heaven among the 4 spiritual masters, but he also had a talented disciple like Ning Chongxian. However, among Venerable Peng's disciples, the one with the highest cultivation level was Qin Nan. The rest were all mediocre. She couldn't be blamed for this. She was from an aristocratic family and had broken off relations with her clan for a long time, so she naturally couldn't choose her disciples from within the sect. The disciple she took in before was merely a maidservant that followed her when she broke out of the sect. Rather than saying that she was a disciple, it was better to say that she was a servant that served her. Mix and pop-up window Su. In this way, it meant that none of Venerable Peng's disciples could compete for the position of the top 10 disciples. Perhaps Qin Nan could, but she would have to wait for another 24 years. However, she wasn't a true disciple, nor did she have the help of Qi Yuntian like Ning Chongxian. Although she was a disciple of Venerable Peng, she was neither a disciple of an aristocratic family nor a disciple of a master. Her situation was somewhat similar to that of Zhang Yan's. Therefore, it was extremely difficult for her to take the position. If Venerable Peng wanted to change his situation, there was only one way, and that was to acknowledge a disciple of the Peng clan as his disciple. However, Zhang Yan thought that the possibility of this was extremely small. It wasn't a wild guess, but it was because Qin Nan had accidentally revealed something in her early years. That year, Zhang Yan, Xie Zongyuan, and the other 4 people wanted to cultivate in the Eye of the Sea Devil Cave in order to break through the mystic light realm. They accidentally met Qin Nan in front of the Shouming Palace. At that time, Qin Nan happened to be accepted by Venerable Peng as his last disciple. Last disciple. This meant that Venerable Peng wouldn't accept any more disciples in the future. Based on Qin Nan's character, it was obvious that she would not make things up. This was Jinren Peng's original intention, and his actions so far proved this point. After Qin Nan, Venerable Peng really didn't accept another disciple. Moreover, after Venerable Peng was expelled from the clan, the sect leader couldn't bear to see her wandering outside, so he arranged for her to live in the Shoming Palace. Although this place was located at the eye of the Sea Devil Cave, and it was unusually deserted, which ordinary people avoided, it was just like an ordinary place for Venerable Peng. Without this Taoist field, she might not have achieved what she had today. This kindness was very important. Even if she didn't help the master and disciple, she wouldn't fight against them. It could be imagined that in the 20 to 30 years between the sect competition and the next one, Immortal Peng could only watch the rest of the 9 caves play chess. She, on the other hand, was ostracized and could not achieve anything from beginning to end. But if someone could fill this gap for her, the result would be very different. Zhang Yan saw this and grasped the context. That was why he had the confidence to stand here today. After waiting for about half an hour, he suddenly smelled a strange fragrance and heard the sound of a bell. Looking up, he saw a tall and voluptuous woman with her hair combed into a high bun walking out. Behind her were several women dressed in palace robes, holding incense lamps and brocade boxes in their hands. The woman was wearing a red dress with a bear collar. Her arms were tied with streamers, and her sleeves were dragging on the ground. Her long skirt was draped with silk and covered with pearls and jade gauze. Her body was surrounded by spiritual qi and colorful clouds. Holding a colorful parrot in her hand, she slowly walked to the main seat in the hall. After sitting down, she raised her phoenix eyes and looked at Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan also raised his head to look at this Venerable Peng. He saw that her face was dignified and beautiful. Her eyebrows and eyes were slightly raised, and she was in high spirits. Venerable Peng saw that Zhang Yan was wearing a loose robe with big sleeves. He was tall and handsome, and his appearance was very good. He nodded slightly and said, "Are you Zhang Yan, the disciple of Headmaster Zhou? I heard that the head immortal ordered you to meditate in the cave residence. How come you have time to come here today?" When Zhang Yan saw that Venerable Peng was willing to come out to see him, he had already half calmed down. He smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "There is no need to pretend in front of Venerable Peng. I came here today because I want to compete for the position of the top 10 disciples. However, there are some obstacles in my cultivation, so I came here to ask for Venerable Peng's help." Zhang Yan went straight to the point as soon as they met. His words didn't conceal his purpose at all, which startled Taoist Peng. Her phoenix-like eyes suddenly flashed with a strange light that fell directly on Zhang Yan as if she wanted to see through him. After a while, she pressed her hand on the phoenix chair and asked, "Why should I help you?" Zhang Yan looked straight at Venerable Peng and said seriously, "If Venerable Peng is willing to help me today, I can help junior sister Qin become one of the top 10 disciples tomorrow." Venerable Peng laughed and said, "What a big tone you have. You are not even one of the top 10 disciples, but you dare to say that you will help my disciple? Where do you get your confidence from? Because of your first-grade gold core?" Zhang Yan smiled and said loudly, "Where there is a will, there is a way. If I don't give it a try, how will I know that I can't do it?" Although Venerable Peng's expression did not change, his heart was in turmoil. What kind of person was she? How sharp was her mind? Zhang Yan had only said a few words and she had immediately thought through the cause and effect. She secretly thought that if Zhang Yan had her help, it was very likely that he would be able to achieve this. Just by looking at the fact that he was the only true disciple of the master and disciple lineage in 100 years, it was obvious. Now that he had also achieved a first-grade core, he really could not be judged by common sense. Moreover, she had to admit that Zhang Yan's move was very clever. If she supported him, she, as the Venerable Dong Tian, could become a player like the other 9, instead of a silent spectator. If Zhang Yan really became one of the top 10 disciples, Qin Nan would have a much higher chance of becoming a top 10 disciple with his help. In the blink of an eye, thousands of thoughts flashed through her mind. In the end, she smiled faintly and supported her forehead with her hand. She leaned back and said, "You've really schemed well. But you must know that besides me, there's no one else in the sect that can help you. If I'm unwilling, then this plan of yours is nothing more than an illusion." Zhang Yan's heart moved. From Daoist Peng's words, he could tell that this Daoist Peng seemed to be very clear about the situation he was currently in. She seemed to be interested in the matter that he had mentioned. However, now that he had taken the initiative to look for her, she naturally wanted to grasp the initiative in her hands. Before Zhang Yan came here, he had also thought about this matter. He was just a core formation cultivator, while the other party was the venerable Dong Tian, so it was almost inevitable that she would do something like this. However, he had come to ask Venerable Peng for help, not to become the other party's pawn. In his plan, the two of them were just working together to get what they needed. There was no distinction between who was the primary and who was the secondary. Otherwise, he would be at the other's mercy in the future. Therefore, he laughed and said, "I'm afraid Venerable Peng has misunderstood. You think that I, Zhang Yan, am here today to beg for mercy. No, even if there is no Venerable Peng, as long as I am willing, I can cross the dangerous pass in front of me with a single step." When he said this, his words revealed a strong sense of self-confidence, and it was obvious that he was not talking nonsense. Venerable Peng was not annoyed. He frowned and pondered for a while, then finally shook his head and said, "I don't know which Venerable Peng in the sect will stand up to protect you at this time." Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He took a step forward and said, "I'm sure Venerable Peng has heard that I helped Tao Jinren when I went out to look for medicine." Venerable Peng raised his eyebrows slightly, as if he had thought of something. Zhang Yan continued, "Now that Tao Jinren has opened a sect in the Far Sea and is the sect leader, he promised me that if I need his help in the future, he will do his best to help me and will never refuse." This was the reason why Zhang Yan was so confident. When he helped Tao Jinren achieve Dao, the Venerable Peng had promised to help him with 3 things. Everyone knew that Tao Jinren was the best at teaching disciples. Moreover, as the sect leader and the inheritor of the Immortal Palace historical abode, the sect must have Earth Emanation's spirit veins. Zhang Yan only needed to use a flying divine talisman to go to the Far Sea and go to the Clear Feather sect. Once he asked, Tao Jinren would definitely use all the power of the sect to help him achieve his goal. There were 2 reasons why he did not do this. First, the promise of the Venerable Dong Tian was very precious. It was not worth it to ask for it when he was only at the core transformation realm. Second, it was best to ask for help from the sect if he wanted to compete for the position of the top 10 disciples. This was a long-term plan. He raised his head and looked at Venerable Peng, who was sitting in the main hall and seemed to be thinking. He believed that as long as Venerable Peng did not want to be excluded by the other 9 Venerable Peng, he would not refuse him. Target =_. Chapter 287. Date: October 9th. After staying in the Guardian Palace for a few days, Zhang Yan returned to the clear nether heavenly lake under Qin Nan's escort. His visit did not attract the attention of others. Apart from the female cultivator who served him, the rest of the maids in the palace thought that he was here to visit Qin Nan. Paying respects to Immortal Peng was just out of courtesy. He returned to the main hall and sat down on the jade couch. With a wave of his sleeve, hundreds of white jade bushes fell on the ground in front of him. Amidst all of these were the plump true sand that was like jade dewdrops and jade pearls. They glowed brilliantly and overflowed with spirit energy, and they were piled up all the way to the mouth of the true sand, and it seemed as if a light tremble would shake them off. Zhang Yan smiled. Just as he had expected, there were a few earth terminus spirit veins hidden in Immortal Peng's cave abode. Judging from the quality of the true sand, it had been cultivated for at least 100 years. This meant that when Immortal Peng went to guard the small devil cave, he had planted the spiritual vein here. Although these earth terminus spirit veins were not as high quality as the ones hidden in the cave abodes of the other enlightened masters, the advantage was that in these 20 to 30 years, only Zhang Yan could use them to cultivate, at least among the core formation cultivators. With a clear shout, he flipped his palm, and a wisp of white mist flew out of his palm. It spun a few times in the air, and then fell down, grabbing the true sand in the bucket. Following the urging of his mind, it suddenly began to grind. In less than half an hour, countless snow-white fragments were scattered around, and a cloud of essence qi that was as clear as water was floating in the air. If one didn't look carefully, it would be almost impossible to distinguish it. Zhang Yan sniffed and inhaled the essence into his stomach. Then, he slowly rotated the golden core. After refining it, he carefully examined it and couldn't help but applaud. Just the spiritual essence contained within this handful of true sand was comparable to over 30 ships of 5-element divine sand from before, and the difference between them could be said to be like the difference between the heavens and the earth. He had personally refined and absorbed these two types of divine sand. His feelings were naturally the most intense and direct. He also sighed in his heart. Sure enough, if he wanted to become one of the top 10 disciples of Qinsang school, he had to find a Taoist paradise to support him. Otherwise, don't even think about succeeding. His gaze swept downwards. These 100 or so bushels were enough for him to use for 4 months. At that time, the true sand would naturally be sent over. Having resolved an urgent matter, he was also delighted in his heart. He put this matter aside. Counting the days, there were still more than 3 years until the sex competition. With his Dan having reached the first grade, it would be impossible for him to break through the shell and condense a true spiritual power imprint within these 3 years. It was not a problem with the true sand, but in a situation where he had enough external objects for cultivation. Increasing the strength of his Dan was still a long and arduous process. He could only rely on himself to accumulate it bit by bit. Therefore, if one wanted to stand out in the sex competition, not only did they have to rely on their cultivation, they also had to rely on their Tao techniques. At this moment, he could only rely on 2 methods. One was the flying bandit technique, and when combined with his piggy sky teleportation technique, he would be able to stand in an invincible position if his opponent didn't have any magic treasures that could counter him. The other method was the mysterious true light. He thought about it in his heart. The flying bandit technique was impressive, but in the sex competition, it was not a life and death battle. There were many methods that he could not use to his heart's content. Moreover, the top 10 disciples had all gone to the sword competition of the 16 sects, so they should have seen the Shaoqing sect's flying sword technique. They must have a way to counter it, so he could not expect too much. If he wanted to defeat his opponent, he had to place his chips on the mysterious true light. However, there was a problem here. His eyes flashed, and his body shook. A water-like brilliance was released. A curtain of water rose up, and with a loud splash, it was like a waterfall that went straight up to the dome. He sat there with his eyes closed, not saying a word or moving. He allowed the water light to fly around. After about an hour, he formed a seal and the water light was sucked back into his body. Just now, no matter how much he urged the pill fiend, and even used up quite a lot of it, he was unable to make the power of this profound light increase by even a fraction. Obviously, he had no way to completely convert the pill fiend into magic power and divine ability. Although the mysterious true light was impressive, his Dan had reached the first grade. According to common sense, with the power of his Dan, if he could control the 5-elemental true light, its power should be endless. However, the power of the water elemental true light might not be much stronger than when he was at the mysterious light realm. It seemed that he could only use the 5-elemental essence to slowly train it to increase its power. At that time, he had thought that this Taoist technique was just like that, so he didn't think too much about it. However, after he read the 9 primordial numinous treasure mystic scripture and read many notes that were mixed within it, he finally understood the reason. In the world, cultivation methods and dharma powers could not be practiced casually. Every cultivation method had to be matched with every Tao technique. Otherwise, no matter how much you practiced, you would not be able to achieve great success. For example, Zhuang Bufan cultivated the Kun Jade Dust technique, one of the 3 techniques and 5 scriptures of the sect. After cultivating this technique, the Dan Sha would gather and disperse at will. It could be as big as a mountain, as small as a speck of dust, as hard as jade, or as soft as sand. After cultivating it to a high level, one would be able to cultivate one of the 12 divine abilities of the sect, the great overarching heavenly sleeve. Zhang Yan had seen Zhuang Bufan's ability on that day. With a flick of his sleeve, everyone in an area of a few kilometers was trapped within his sleeve, and not a single one of them was able to escape. If he were to encounter such an ability in battle with Zhuang Bufan, then he could only retreat far away. If the other disciples of the sect had made great contributions to the sect, then they could naturally cultivate this Dao technique and divine ability as well. However, if they did not cultivate the Kun Jade Dust technique first, then they would not be able to bring out the full power of this divine ability. If Zhuang Yufan was able to transform all the Dan Sha luck in his body into a divine ability with just a raise of his hand, and those whose cultivation techniques did not match would only be able to draw out half of the Dan Sha luck, then it would naturally be obvious who was stronger. Therefore, Zhang Yan suspected that this 5 elements mysterious true light of 5 directions might have a matching cultivation technique, and not just a divine ability or Dao technique. If his conjecture was true, then the old Daoist had only given him a remnant of a scroll. As for whether Daoran was unwilling to give him the complete scroll, or if it was because he only had an incomplete scroll, then it was unknown. However, Zhang Yan's guess was more inclined towards the latter. Because only the essence of the 5 directions could be used to cultivate the mysterious true light and control the true light freely, and it would undoubtedly save the step of cultivating a cultivation technique. This should have been meticulously modified by the later generations. But if one had the original copy, then who would waste time and effort on it for nothing? It was probably because of this. Without a suitable cultivation technique to match it, he only had an ancient and dazzling Dan Sha luck. But he could not make it into a shocking divine ability. But it was not that there was no solution. The mysterious true scripture of 9 numbers Taisher's spiritual treasures in his hands was originally used to deduce cultivation techniques. If he could deduce a method to use and cultivate the 5 elements mysterious true light from it, then he would not be afraid of any disciples of the same generation in the competition. He stood up and paced back and forth in the mansion. It seemed that in these 3 years, other than continuously tempering the Dan Sha, he also had to find a way to break through this method. At least, he had to make use of his Dan Sha luck and not waste it. But after reading this scripture a few times, he found that it was indeed profound and abstruse. There are not many notes left by people. There is very little for him to refer to. At this moment, he suddenly remembered that Elder Gong had once said that in the little cold world, he could find the experience and comprehension left by many predecessors. Since there were predecessors' notes, he should naturally take a look and verify with each other. Even if others walked into a dead end, he could also know which path was wrong. There is no time like the present. Why don't I go visit Elder Gong today? After Zhang Yan made up his mind, he did not hesitate at all. He flung open his sleeves, stood up and stepped out of the formation door. He left Bright Nether Heavenly Lake and headed towards the Merit Yard. The Merit Yard was located on the 9 Lives Peak of the Black Turtle Continent. After Zhang Yan entered the mountain, he pushed through the wind and clouds. Not long after, he arrived in front of the main gate. He looked around and saw that the sky was clear and blue, the mountains were clear and the waters were clear. The pine trees were like the sea, and the jade steps at the foot of the mountain were enough for 10 people to walk side by side. On the temple at the peak, there were 3 flying pavilions in the sky. Below them, there were smoke and clouds, and between them were green vines. Colorful birds flew back and forth, and spring water flowed through the cracks of the cold rocks. It actually didn't land on the ground, but a jade-wave celestial river that surrounded the mountain was suspended above the temple. There were a dozen white-haired Daoran people fishing there. Their expressions were relaxed and they were enjoying themselves. When Zhang Yan arrived, a cultivator with thick eyebrows and broad shoulders came to welcome him on a mysterious light. He suddenly shouted, "Who are you? Why are you still flying on the clouds in front of the merit yard? Why haven't you landed yet?" Zhang Yan smiled in his heart and thought, "I heard that among the 9 yards, only the merit yard is the most arrogant. Other than being respectful to the sect master and the people of the heavenly abode, all the other disciples and elders are treated the same. Looks like it's really not bad." He didn't say anything, he just took out a talisman from his sleeve and waved it. When the cultivator with broad shoulders saw the talisman, he couldn't help but be startled, and his attitude immediately took a big turn. He cupped his hands and said, "May I know which elder is this martial uncle looking for?" Zhang Yan said in a deep voice, "I am here to visit Elder Gong, is he here?" When the cultivator with broad shoulders heard this, his expression changed slightly. He suddenly came up and pulled on Zhang Yan's sleeve and said in a low voice, "Dao brother, come with me, let's talk in the back hall." Just as Zhang Yan was puzzled, an old man who was fishing suddenly threw the fishing rod in his hand and turned into a mist that flew out. He stopped in front of the two of them, pointed at Zhang Yan and said angrily, You are here to see Gong Daoren?" Zhang Yan glanced at him and nodded. "Yes." When Daoren heard this, his beard and eyebrows twitched. He beat his chest and stamped his feet. This old thief, a few days ago, he said that someone was coming to visit him. I thought, with his bad temper, why would anyone come to visit him? I even bet a pill jade with him. Now that you're here, I've lost miserably. No, you have to give me a clear explanation, otherwise you're not allowed to go in. He came up and wanted to pull on Zhang Yan's sleeve. When the cultivator with broad shoulders saw that he was pestering endlessly, he couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. The elders in the merit courtyard were all extremely high in seniority, and they had given up on cultivating Dao. Just now, they came here to live out their lives in retirement and wait for death. Some of them even practiced Xian techniques, causing their temperament to change greatly and become crazy. This Daoren was one of them. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly and he said with a light smile, "This elder Daoren, I feel that you should be happy." Daoren was puzzled. "Why?" Zhang Yan sighed. "Elder Gong didn't bet his life with you, he only bet his pill jade with you. Don't tell me you didn't take advantage of him." Daoren was startled. He frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly, he clapped his hands and became elated. He danced and said, "That's right, that's right. That's right, that's right. It's this old man who took advantage of you, took advantage of you." The cultivator with broad shoulders was dumbfounded. He looked at Zhang Yan with admiration and said in a low voice, "Dao brother, you're very capable. Quickly, follow me." Zhang Yan shook his head. He wasn't in the mood to argue with that crazy Daoren. He waved his sleeve and followed the cultivator into the inner hall. Target equals _blank. Chapter 288. A certain link of the Grand Tao. After Zhang Yan followed the broad-shouldered cultivator into the inner hall, his eyes widened and a dazzling light shined in front of him. He looked up and saw that there were hundreds of short bronze pillars that were less than a foot long erected in a circle. The hall was bright and spacious. The lamps on both sides of the hall were holding up pearls and stones, shining brightly. In the middle of the hall was a jade platform inlaid with pearls and stones. A beautiful woman wearing a colorful robe and a golden ring sat on top of the platform. There was an apricot yellow notice floating in front of the woman. Her beautiful eyes were focused on the notice, and from time to time, she would stretch out her slender hand and move it back and forth. A wisp of spirit light would flash, and strands of clear chi would transform into talismans that flew onto the copper pillar and slowly revolved there. The broad-shouldered cultivator smiled and went up to greet her. He cupped his hands and said, "Martial Uncle Chi, this Dao brother is here to visit Elder Gong." After a pause, he saw that the woman was still in a daze and didn't seem to hear him, so he quickly said, "Martial Uncle Chi, this senior martial brother is here to see Elder Gong." He has Elder Gong's talisman with him, so he shouldn't be an outsider. At this time, the woman softly responded with an "n" sound and raised her head to look at Zhang Yan. A trace of surprise flashed through her beautiful eyes as she smiled at him and said, Elder Gong went to the 100 Fragrance River today and will return in the afternoon. I'm afraid that senior brother will have to wait here for a while. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and smiled. No problem. The woman rubbed her hands together and a ray of light appeared in her palms. She pointed with her slender fingers and a letter flew out. There was a pair of nimble wings on the letter, and it fluttered in the air. It looked delicate and cute, and it quickly flew away. Zhang Yan knew that this pair of wings was only conjured by magic power and had no use on its own. It was just that the female cultivators in the sect were particularly fond of these decorations, so most of them spent extra effort on the items they used. The woman seemed to be busy and didn't bother to greet Zhang Yan. She gave him an apologetic look and continued to focus on the flying list in her hand. After the hundreds of pillars were filled with talisman, several maidservants came up and took the talisman away. During this time, one of the maidservants glanced at the talisman and hesitated for a moment before moving closer to the woman and asking, Martial Aunt Qi, this senior martial brother Yao has made 6 great contributions, which can be considered a great merit. Why did you cut one of his contributions? If he doesn't accept it, how am I supposed to tell him? The woman faintly smiled and said, Go tell Yao Heng that he bought that beast core from the celestial market. Don't think he can hide it from me. This time, it's just a light punishment. If he dares to cause trouble, don't think I won't dare to cut his merit. The maidservant didn't dare to say anything else and quickly retreated with her head lowered. Zhang Yan now knew that this woman was the person in charge of the merit court. This wasn't simple at all. Seeing Zhang Yan look over, perhaps because she had finished her task, the woman smiled at him and said, The merit court is filled with elders and seniors. It's not good to keep them busy every day, so they captured this little girl to do their work. It really is hard to describe. Zhang Yan smiled. How could he take her words seriously? This woman clearly had the trust of the elders in the merit courtyard. That was why she was able to come here to receive the merit assessment. Furthermore, looking at the way she was reborn, she seemed to be enjoying it. She held the authority of the merit courtyard in her hands. Most of the disciples in the sect would come to curry favor with her. The woman said again, This little girl is Qi Mengjiao. May I ask for senior's name? Zhang Yan said, I am Zhang Yan. Qi Mengjiao's beautiful eyes widened. She said in surprise, Eh? So you are Yan Yi's master? Zhang Yan's eyebrows twitched. He said in surprise, This senior also knows this little disciple. Just as Qi Mengjiao was about to speak, she heard a burst of laughter coming from outside. Elder Gong quickly walked into the hall, and when he saw Zhang Yan, his face lit up with joy. He grabbed Zhang Yan's arm and said, Junior brother Zhang, you're here. Come. Let's drink, haha. Zhang Yan smiled and cupped his hands at Qi Mengjiao. Then he casually said goodbye and left. Qi Mengjiao also got up and bowed. She watched Zhang Yan leave. Until his figure disappeared, she still stood there in a daze. No one knew what she was thinking. The two of them rode the wind. Zhang Yan saw that Elder Gong was in high spirits. He said with a smile, Elder Gong, is there some good news? Elder Gong laughed. Junior brother Zhang, you are asking the obvious. If you didn't come, how could old madman Ji's few pieces of pill jade fall into my hands, Doran's hands? He laughed a few more times. Stroking his beard, he said, You came to find me, Daoran. Are you going to the little cold realm? Zhang Yan nodded. Yes. Elder Gong also nodded. His smile faded a little. The little cold realm opens its cave residence just now. I still have a lot of good wine here. Why don't you drink a few cups first? It won't be too late to go when it's time. Elder Gong mentioned the good wine in the residence several times. Zhang Yan felt that there might be something special about the wine. But he didn't mention it. Elder Gong was the oldest in the merit court and had the most seniority. There was no harm in having a good relationship with him. So he gladly agreed. The two of them rode the wind and went to a flying pavilion in the south. The 9th floor was where Elder Gong cultivated in seclusion. The spiritual energy in the merit court was not abundant. It could only be compared to an ordinary blessed land. But Elder Gong didn't mind. It had been hundreds of years since he entered the 3rd Yuanying realm. He felt that he didn't have much time left. A few years ago, he wanted to go into seclusion in the little cold realm to break through. But he didn't know why, but he took up a position in the merit court. Every day, he fished, visited friends, drank, and made merry. It was a leisurely life. After passing through the main door and entering the inner hall, Zhang Yan took a few glances. Elder Gong's residence was very elegant. There were lush green bamboos, gurgling sounds of spring water, and several odd-shaped stones clustered around a cloud pavilion. Several yellow orioles perched on the branches, chirping incessantly. Near the door, there was a horizontal bar with a white parrot perched on it. However, its eyelids were heavy, as if it was dozing off. Elder Gong was furious and said, "Master is back. Why aren't you barking?" The white parrot quivered and immediately shrieked, "Old Master is calling, Old Master is calling." Elder Gong's face twitched and he was about to hit it. The white parrot was startled and flew into the forest to hide. It said, "Old Master, don't hit me, don't hit me. I know I'm wrong, I know I'm wrong." Zhang Yan couldn't help but smile. But in his heart, he sighed. Elder Gong seemed to be living a comfortable life, but how many years could he live freely? Time passed by quickly. In the blink of an eye, hundreds and thousands of years had passed. Even if he had a moment of happiness, if he couldn't live forever, everything was just a fleeting dream. Few people came to Elder Gong's place. Today, when Zhang Yan came, he greeted him warmly. He pulled Zhang Yan to sit in the pavilion and clapped his hands. Immediately, a few white monkeys jumped into the pavilion and brought over a jar of wine. Elder Gong saw that the seal was gone. He laughed and scolded, "These animals are sneaking a drink again." He pointed his finger and a pair of wine cups appeared out of nowhere. The wine jar flew up and the mouth of the jar sank, filling the cups to the brim. Elder Gong raised his cup and said, "Come, come, junior apprentice brother Zhang, drink a few cups with me." Zhang Yan smiled and shook his sleeve. He also raised his cup and drank it with Elder Gong. As soon as the wine entered his stomach, he felt a warm flow of air moving around his body. His body heated up and his pores relaxed. He actually felt a little tipsy. He couldn't help but be surprised in his heart. It must be known that the meridians of cultivators were connected and they consumed the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. No matter how much wine they drank, they would be completely fine. But this wine had only been drunk in a single gulp, yet it had such an effect. It was truly extraordinary. Elder Gong said proudly, "Junior apprentice brother Zhang, how is it?" "My wine is called Yang Returning Wine. After drinking it, you can drive away the cold wind and strengthen your inner yang. The little cold world that you are going to is covered in ice and snow all year round. The yin qi seeps into your bones. Without this wine, you won't be able to drive away the cold." Zhang Yan smiled, "So it is Elder Gong's good intention. I will drink a few more cups." Elder Gong was even happier when he heard that. He said, "Drink as much as you want. Daoren has this wine." As the two of them drank, they discussed the matters of the sect. Elder Gong was a Taoist master of Yuanying realm, so Zhang Yan took the opportunity to ask him about many things he didn't understand on the path of cultivation. Elder Gong naturally told him everything he knew. At the end of the hour, Elder Gong looked at the sky and took out a golden sword. With a wave of his hand, he flew out of the pavilion and headed north. He then said, "Junior brother Zhang, in another 2 hours, the wintry realm will open its gates. You can go now." "Oh right, there's still." He took out an exquisite wine jug from his sleeve and handed it over. In a low and mysterious voice, he said, "My spring arrival bottle can hold a river's worth of water. But right now, it's filled with Huanyang wine. I'll give this treasure to you, but remember, don't let Taoist Yuan snatch it away." Zhang Yan did not decline and accepted it. He cupped his hands together and said, "I'm sorry to have disturbed Elder Gong this time." Elder Gong laughed and said, "What are you talking about? Just remember to visit me more often in the future." Zhang Yan solemnly cupped his hands again. When he was about to leave, Elder Gong said, "Wait. Bring the remaining half of the wine and give it to Old Man Yuan." Zhang Yan looked at the unsealed wine jar and couldn't help but be surprised. Half a jar. Elder Gong seemed to be waiting for him to ask this. He said proudly, "If there are too many of them, they won't be rare anymore. I, Daoren, want to keep him in suspense and make him feel uncomfortable. Otherwise, he will turn the sky upside down. Just listen to me. Remember, tell him that you hid it for him. I guarantee that you will benefit from it." Zhang Yan nodded his head. With a wave of his sleeve, he kept the half jar of wine into his pouch. After that, he bid farewell to Elder Gong and left. Riding the clouds, he headed towards the location of the Little Cold Realm. The Little Cold World was a small world. The abode was on the Parting Peak, north of the Great Pool of Dragon Lake. The peak was cold and desolate all year round. Birds disappeared without a trace. Now, under the night sky, it was even more desolate and cold. It took Zhang Yan an hour. Just now, he arrived at this place. He saw a 5 feet tall stone tablet on the peak. He stopped there and saw that the tablet was mottled and overgrown with weeds. The words on the tablet were already illegible. Only a line of scribbled handwriting could be seen clearly at the bottom corner. It said, "I advise you to turn back early. Don't come to this world. The cold wind scrapes your bones. Even if you have 9 lives, you will die." Zhang Yan smiled faintly. He looked ahead and saw a temple on the high cliff. There was a lamp swaying in the temple. It looked like it could be extinguished at any time. He shouted, "Is Elder Yuan here?" "I am Zhang Yan. I would like to see you." To be continued. This text is provided by. You are welcome to cast your recommendation votes, monthly votes, etc. Target =_blank. Chapter 289. Date, October 9th. Chapter 26. The lesser cold realm. A weak voice came from within the temple. Which unfortunate person has come here to suffer? Just as he finished speaking, there was a sudden clatter from within the temple. The door opened and out flew a disheveled-looking Daoren. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of Zhang Yan. H-Neat, Book C Pavilion /advertisement. Download the full text. Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. This Elder Yuan was indeed a Yuanying enlightened master. Elder Yuan's nose twitched a few times, then he glared at Zhang Yan and said in a bad mood, "How much did you drink with that old Gong?" Zhang Yan smiled, "Not much. But Elder Gong ordered me to deliver half a jar." Hearing this, Elder Yuan's eyes lit up. He anxiously ran around Zhang Yan. "Where's the wine? Where's the wine? Hurry up and bring it out." Zhang Yan shook his sleeve and half a jar of wine floated out. Elder Yuan could not wait to grab it. His face was full of greed. He first took a deep breath, then tilted his head back and gulped down a few mouthfuls. Cold air rose from the top of his head and rose into the air. A pine branch on top of him was instantly covered in a layer of frost. Zhang Yan looked at it and knew that it was the cold air that Elder Yuan expelled from his body with the help of the wine. After a while, Elder Yuan let out a long sigh of relief. He wiped his mouth and chuckled, "Just now, I, Daoren, was waiting for Old Man Gong's Huanyang wine to save my life. I didn't expect it to be your good fortune." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "Elder Yuan, I am here to enter the Lesser Cold Realm to observe the experiences of the predecessors. I wonder if you can make an exception." Elder Yuan had just drunk the Huanyang wine and he could not reject Xiang Xiaolong. He waved his sleeves and smiled, "Come with me." As he said this, a strong gust of wind rose from the ground. Zhang Yan did not resist, allowing the wind to wrap around him as he walked forward. In just a few breaths of time, they arrived in front of a dark stone door that was 10 feet tall. On both sides of the door were two motionless black tortoises, both of them wrapped in chains. They did not seem to notice the two of them, nor did they move in the slightest. There was a dim pearl hanging above the entrance of the cave. It was unknown how long it had been there, but it was dark and gloomy, emitting a faint light. There was a small path on the side. Elder Yuan waved his hand at Zhang Yan and said, "Come." He then took the lead and walked towards the path. After about 50 steps, they arrived at a cave about 3 to 4 feet wide. There was an everlasting lamp lit in the cave. The candles were as small as beans. In the middle of the cave, there was a large stone table. Bundles of jade inscriptions were placed on niches cut into the stone wall. Because of the formation, there were no cobwebs or dust on the jade inscriptions. The jade inscriptions were crystal clear. Elder Yuan said in a deep voice, "Junior brother Zhang, before we enter this world, Daoren, I need to tell you something. This little cold realm is vast and has a circumference of tens of thousands of miles. Who knows how many caves, creeks, and cold pools there are? If you want to search for the insights of the predecessors, you will not find anything even if you search for years. Why don't you tell me which scripture you are practicing? I, Daoren, have been guarding this place for more than 300 years. Although I do not know the situation here like the back of my hand, I do know a lot about it." Zhang Yan said honestly, "The martial art I am practicing is one of the 5 skills and 3 scriptures, the 9 Taisha spiritual treasures Xian Ming scripture." "So it is this martial art?" Elder Yuan looked at Zhang Yan in surprise. He frowned and thought for a while. He stroked his beard and said, "For the past 100 years, there has not been anyone practicing this martial art. Let me think carefully." He took a few steps and went to the shrine and took out a few bundles of jade slips. He opened them and looked at them. After a while, he put them back and went to the other side and took out a few bundles of jade slips. After a few times, he finally finished fiddling with the jade slips. He walked to the stone table and took out a map from his sleeve that was made from the fur of an unknown rare bird. He then took out a red brush and marked out a dozen places on the map. He then handed the map to Zhang Yan. He pointed and said, "You can go and check out these few caves. Most likely, there will not be any mistake." Zhang Yan reached out and took it. He looked at it a few times and kept it in his pocket. He cupped his hands and thanked him, "Thank you for your care, Elder Yuan." Just now, he could clearly see that the dozen or so caves that were marked out were scattered in different directions. They were not connected to each other. If Elder Yuan did not try his best to tell him, he would not be able to find them. The half a jar of Huanyang wine was very worth it. Elder Yuan laughed and said, "Don't thank me. Daoren, I can see that you have a close relationship with Gong Daoren. If there is good wine in the future, don't forget this old man." Zhang Yan immediately agreed and said, "Elder Yuan, don't worry. If I drink with Elder Gong next time, I will definitely save some for you." Elder Yuan smiled and said, "Elder Yuan, don't worry. If I drink with Elder Gong next time, I will definitely save some for you." Presently, it wasn't time for the abode to be opened, so he stood guard here alone. There were no juniors in the sect, and normally, no one would come here. Now that he saw Zhang Yan, he couldn't help but tell Zhang Yan some matters of the past, and he poured out many secrets of the sect. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. Although he had heard a lot from Zhou Chengju, Elder Yuan was 800 years old and was a disciple of Qinsang school. Therefore, he knew some secrets better than Zhou Chengju. After the conversation, he had a vague understanding of the current situation in the sect. When it was midnight, there was a sudden rumble in the cave. Elder Yuan stood up and said, "Junior brother Zhang, the realm gate has been opened." Follow Daoren. Elder Yuan led the way, and the two of them returned to the entrance of the cave. The originally dark stone door was now open, and a bone-chilling wind blew out, blowing on their bodies. Even with Zhang Yan's level of cultivation, and after drinking the yang returning wine, he still felt a chill run down his spine. Elder Yuan narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "In this small cold realm, the 9 nether cold wind will blow 12 hours a day. Those with slightly lower cultivation will immediately freeze their hearts and lungs and die on the ground when they are blown by the cold wind. Because of this, the cultivators in seclusion here all hide in their caves to cultivate. If you don't drink a few mouthfuls of Huanyang wine when you come here, don't even talk about riding the wind. Just being blown by it a few times will make you unable to move." Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. He thought about the spring bottle that Elder Gong gave him and thought, so this wine has such an effect. If this is the case, I can fly outside. Otherwise, I will have to sit in the cave for half a day every day. That is a waste of time. What he didn't know was that the previous guards of the little cold realm all died before 100 years had passed because the 9 nether cold wind invaded their bones. Elder Yuan, on the other hand, had been guarding the cave for more than 350 years with the Huanyang wine keeping him out of the cold. However, if he didn't drink it for a day, he would feel uncomfortable all over. Elder Yuan searched his sleeve for a while and took out a talisman. He gave it to him and said, "Junior brother Zhang, take this. If you want to come out, you only need to open this talisman at noon every day and you will be able to leave this realm. There is one more thing I need to remind you. There is a person imprisoned in the depths of this small realm. If you see the formation, you must stay far away from it. Otherwise, you might get hurt." Zhang Yan was a little surprised. However, to be imprisoned in this place, he must not be a simple person. With his current cultivation level, he was afraid that he couldn't provoke him. He said, "I understand." Elder Yuan nodded his head. He closed his eyes and pointed to the front. He didn't say anything else. Zhang Yan cupped his hands at him and walked into the cave. After walking for about 10 steps, he suddenly felt his field of vision open. He saw the rise and fall of the mountain range. Under his feet was pure white snow. As far as the eye could see, it was all ice crystals, cold rocks, and frozen walls. The sky was as dark as dusk. It was cold everywhere. He looked to the north and thought for a while. Then he used his Dan Sha and flew up. He turned into a white smoke and flew towards the nearest cave according to the map. After 100 miles, the 9 nether cold wind in the sky seemed to be blowing more and more fiercely. He couldn't help but frown slightly. Although the wind wasn't strong enough to blow him off the cloud, he still felt his hands and feet were a little cold. He secretly exclaimed in his heart that it was powerful. He quickly took out the spring bottle and drank a few mouthfuls of wine. Only then did his body gradually warm up. In fact, if it was someone who wanted to escape, even if he had the Huanyang wine with him, he wouldn't be able to fly far like him. He could only find a place to temporarily hide and wait for the cold wind to pass before daring to come out. The reason why he could do this was because he had practiced the spirit contract devil technique. His whole body was like it was forged with gold and iron. Not even the slightest bit of cold wind could enter his body. After flying for another 100 miles, he saw that the landscape of the mountains and rivers below was somewhat similar to what was shown on the map. After taking a closer look and confirming that there was no mistake, he slightly lowered the cloud and circled around the mountain. Then, he saw an abandoned immortal's cave that was half closed. Zhang Yan shook his sleeves and flew into the cave. The entrance of the cave wasn't big, but the inside was quite spacious. There were holes in the cave and strange stones were piled up. He waved his sleeves and dozens of pearls flew out and floated around him. Suddenly, the cave was brightly lit. He walked forward and carefully looked around. Not long after, he arrived at the depths of the cave. At this time, he suddenly felt something and looked up. He saw that on a rock less than 3 feet away from him, there was a mighty Taoist with hair and beard sitting upright. His whole body was open, his eyes were open, and his fists were clenched tightly as if he was about to scold him. Zhang Yan glanced at him indifferently and turned away. This Taoist had died here for many years. Even the Taoist robe on his body had melted. Looking at his expression, it seemed that when he knew that he was going to die, a strong unwillingness surged in his heart. That was why he was like this. Qinsang School had been established for tens of thousands of years, but there were only a few people who could really set foot on the path of immortality and ascend to outer space. During this period, it was unknown how many amazing and talented people had died on this path of cultivation. Zhang Yan thought silently. The path of immortality was vast, and immortality was hard to seek. If he didn't grasp every opportunity and didn't strive to fight for that chance to achieve immortality, one day, he was afraid that he would also end up like this. He didn't know which senior in the sect this Taoist was. He didn't want to destroy the ancestors' slough, so he carefully went around it. His eyes patrolled on the two walls and searched. This should be the Taoist's main residence. If there was any experience, it should be nearby. Sure enough, not long after, he found densely packed words on a stone wall in the southeast. Looking at the cultivation method, it was the 9 numbers Taisher spiritual treasure mystic true scripture. Zhang Yan was overjoyed. He didn't want to waste time and waved his hand. The dozens of pearls floated up and down in order, immediately illuminating the entire stone wall. Target equals _blank. Chapter 290. For more than 10 days, Zhang Yan had been running around in the little cold world, searching for the cave dwelling that Elder Yuan had drawn out one by one, not missing a single one. After a round of careful observation and verification with his own thoughts, he faintly understood something else. It was just that on the notes left behind, there was a sense of resentment and regret between the lines. Thinking about it, those who came here to cultivate in seclusion were actually forced to do so. Think about it, a lifetime of bitter cultivation, hundreds of years, even thousands of years, in order to seek longevity, but at the last step, they were blocked by the heavenly Tao, unable to take a step out. In the end, even their original spirits could not escape. How unwilling would their hearts be? But Zhang Yan was not moved by these emotions. The road ahead was chosen by oneself. In fact, they could also be reincarnated ahead of time, but since they had already decided to come here, it was obvious that they had already cast aside those thoughts, so no matter what the result was, they had to bear it themselves. He searched for the cave dwelling every day, following the continuous mountain range all the way from the south to the north, getting further and further away from the entrance of the little cold world. Today, however, he arrived at the top of a bare mountain. Facing the whistling cold wind, he stepped on the smoke, took out the spring bottle, drank a few mouthfuls of young returning wine, and swept his eyes back and forth. Almost in an instant, he found the cave dwelling he was looking for, waved his sleeves, pushed aside the cold wind, and descended. He passed through the door and stepped in, flying close to the ground for about 500 feet, suddenly heard a deep voice in front of him. Which fellow cultivator has come here? For many days, Zhang Yan had not seen a living person, and now that he suddenly heard a human voice, he was slightly surprised. But when he came in just now, he found that this place was different from where he was. There was very little dust, and the ground was quite clean, so he guessed that there might be someone living here. But since he had already come in, he did not think about leaving. Now that he heard the other party's question, his tone was gentle and calm, without the slightest displeasure or anger, so he took the initiative to step forward and said, "I am Zhang Yan, may I know which senior from the sect is cultivating here?" On the opposite stone platform sat a middle-aged Taoist who looked to be in his 40s. His black beard trailed down to his abdomen, and his face was elegant. It could be seen that he was a handsome man in the past, but now his aura was weak, and his face was gloomy, looking sickly. He looked at Zhang Yan's face a few times, and couldn't help but be surprised. "I see that fellow cultivator's yang qi is strong, and your eyes are clear, and your spirit is clear. You probably don't have long left, right?" Why did you come to this little cold world? Did you offend someone? Zhang Yan shook his head. No, it's just because of the sex competition. I still have some doubts about the cultivation method, and with the guidance of the sex elders, I specially came here to observe the experience of the predecessors, in order to increase my knowledge. It's just that when I came here, I only cared about comprehending the mystery, and didn't want to disturb seniors' cultivation. The middle-aged Taoist smiled and waved his hand, saying, that's not a problem. This is already the depths of this little cold world, and along the way, you must have seen many of the seniors' remains. If you came 10 days later, I'm afraid that the person you see would be the same as those people. Zhang Yan glanced at this person, and from his words, it seemed that this person did not care about his life and death at all, but rather, there was a faint respect. The middle-aged Taoist pointed to a cave wall in the west, and said, on that cave wall are the carvings left by the predecessors, you can go and see for yourself. Zhang Yan took a few steps forward and glanced around. After looking at many irrelevant cultivation techniques, he finally focused on the 9 primordial numinous treasure mystic true scripture. With a wave of his hand, he scattered the pearls and sat cross-legged under the cave wall. He used the light to carefully read it. The middle-aged Taoist took a look, and asked doubtfully, could it be that you have cultivated the 9 numbers true scripture? Zhang Yan's expression changed, and he stood up, saying, yes, senior, do you have any advice? He was sincerely asking for advice. Although he had gained a lot from reading the experiences of the predecessors, because of the limitations of the writing or his lack of understanding, some of the details were vague, and not very detailed. He always felt that he had not fully understood it, and he had to go back and explore it again. However, if there was someone who could explain it to him, then it would really be a worthwhile trip. The middle-aged Taoist shook his head and smiled bitterly. This cultivation method is profound and unpredictable, and even I don't understand it, and I've never heard of anyone who has cultivated it. Back then, I had a senior who was proud and arrogant, but he practiced it for 100 years without any results, wasting his talent for nothing. If you turn back now, it's not too late. Zhang Yan could hear the faint persuasion in the middle-aged Taoist's words, and he smiled faintly, and sat down again. The middle-aged Taoist's body was shrouded in darkness, and he looked at Chu Li's back, and his eyes were flickering. After a while, he coughed, and said, fellow Taoist, since you have cultivated the 9 numbers true scripture, I believe you have not learned any superior cultivation method from the Qinsang school. I have a superior cultivation method here, and it is not inferior to the 5 skills and 3 numbers true scriptures. However, I have taken the wrong path back then, and I can no longer turn back to cultivate. It is a pity, but if you are willing to help me, and bring my primordial spirit out of this little cold realm, and hand me over to the people of my clan, I will give this Taoist book to you. What do you think? Zhang Yan thought for a while, and then said frankly, I'm afraid this is difficult. Fellow Taoist, your life is coming to an end, and your primordial spirit is extremely weak. I'm afraid it will dissipate before you can leave this realm. Even if I help you, it will not be of much use. The middle-aged Taoist did not give up, and said, maybe you can try, there is always a possibility. Zhang Yan shook his head, there was almost no possibility of success. For a demon like Gui Songyao, he still had to carefully prepare for many years, and then find a person with great luck to help him. Even so, it was not foolproof. This Taoist obviously came up with this idea after seeing him, and he wanted to fight for a chance. Not to mention whether this would work or not, it was impossible to help him. If he accepted, he would be bearing the karma of this person. The two of them did not know each other, and he did not even know this person's name and background. If it was just for a cultivation method, it was impossible. The Taoist saw that he did not agree, and suddenly laughed coldly, and said, don't think of taking away the cultivation method after I die. This cultivation method is naturally remembered in my heart. If my primordial spirit dissipates, it will dissipate from heaven and earth. At this moment, Zhang Yan had already memorized the words on the cave wall, and he only needed to go back and slowly study it. He stood up, and bowed to the middle-aged Taoist. He waved his sleeve, and without saying a word, He was about to leave. The middle-aged Taoist saw that he was about to leave, and immediately panicked, and shouted loudly, "Wait, what do you want for you to agree?" Zhang Yan said indifferently, "This is something that I know I can't do, why do you have to force me?" The middle-aged Taoist still did not want to give up, and his expression was conflicted. He clenched his teeth, and said, "My tribe still has a few magical weapons, and one of them is a profound weapon. It is just that I came here to cultivate, and I did not bring it with me. If you are willing to help me, I am willing to swear that I will give it to you as well." Profound weapon? Zhang Yan scoffed to himself. He had 2 of them in that small pot mirror, and one on him. Not to mention profound weapons, he did not even lack true weapons. If it was someone else, they might be tempted, but he really did not care. The middle-aged Taoist saw that he was still unwilling, and couldn't help but panic in his heart. He couldn't help but shriek, You tell me, what do you want for you to help me?" Zhang Yan looked at the person with pity, and the person's previous carefree attitude was completely gone, and what replaced it was only a ferocious expression. He sighed, and said, "That day when I came here, it was Taoist's own choice. I believe you have already expected this ending, so why do you have to make such a fool of yourself today?" When the middle-aged Taoist heard this, he suddenly cursed, and said, "Bullshit. Do you know that I have suffered so much in these 60 years, and I have long been unable to endure it? If I had known this earlier, I would have learned from the people of my tribe to enjoy life, and why would I come here to suffer? That is fine, but you did not come earlier, nor did you come later. You just had to come before my lifespan is about to end, and you have clearly evoked my thoughts again. Today, whether you agree or not, you have to agree. If you don't, I will die either way, and I will drag you down with me." This was the small cold world, and there were no outsiders here. Even if he died, there would be no one to collect his corpse. There was also the Yin wind raging outside, and naturally, the original spirit could not escape. He had already given up on this idea, but when Zhang Yan arrived, he noticed that it was the time when the Yin wind of the 9 underworlds was blowing, which meant that Zhang Yan was not afraid of this wind, and this made his hope reignite. However, he also knew that the more he begged, the more others would want to manipulate him. So at the beginning, he did his best to pretend to be calm, because he didn't want Zhang Yan to use this to threaten him, and ask for too many things from him. But he never thought that after he threw out a few baits, this Zhang Yan would not be moved at all. In fact, he had also miscalculated. Right now, Zhang Yan wanted to show off in the competition in 3 years, and even if he obtained a superior cultivation method now, he would not have the time to start cultivating from the beginning. Only with the Taishian True Light could he find a chance to win. Moreover, if he became one of the top 10 disciples in the future, he naturally would not have to worry about cultivation methods. So what this middle-aged Taoist said was only of little value to him. Zhang Yan did not care about this kind of threat. Those who came here to break through were mostly core formation cultivators. Not to mention that the other was now at the end of his life. Even if he was at his peak, if he wanted to kill Zhang Yan, he would have to ask the North Dark Sword clone in his consciousness for permission. He cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist, take care of yourself. I will take my leave." The middle-aged Taoist finally gave up. His lips trembled, and a crazed look suddenly appeared on his face. He shouted, "Then you will accompany me to the grave." He waved his sleeve, and suddenly, blue smoke rolled behind him. The sound of tides was loud, like the churning of the sea. Huge waves surged, rolling up to a height of 10 feet, and rushed to the top of the cave. Broken rocks flew everywhere, like rain, and came crashing down towards Zhang Yan. But Zhang Yan stood where he was without moving. When the wild waves were about to fall on his body, he said indifferently, "What if I agree?" "What?" When the middle-aged Taoist heard these words, it was like a clap of thunder had flashed in his ears. He thought that Zhang Yan had changed his mind. He looked up, but saw that Zhang Yan was not dodging at all. He instantly panicked, and with a loud cry, he forcefully retracted the core fiend. It was just that just now, he had used almost all his strength. Now that he did this again, it almost shattered his Jindan. He could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood, and his aura weakened again. A light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes, but with a wave of his sleeve, he turned into a wisp of smoke and left the cave. His voice could be heard from outside, saying, "Fellow Taoist is overcautious, and has no intention of severing everything. You have no intention of going back, and yet you have to come to this dangerous place to waste your time. What Tao have you cultivated, and what longevity do you seek? You had better be on your way." The middle-aged Taoist did not think that he would be made a fool of. He could only watch as Zhang Yan left. Not long after, his body trembled, and he let out a cry of unwillingness. He died instantly. Target equals _blank. Chapter 291. Outside the cave, snow filled the sky. The deeper he went into the little cold world, the colder it became. Zhang Yan looked up, drinking wine to resist the cold while reading the stone inscriptions on the cave wall. This was the last cave residence he had searched, because it was almost the northernmost part of the little cold realm. Most of the cultivators who could come here were people with profound cultivation and firm Taoist hearts. They came with the intention of not turning back until they succeeded. They were far more powerful than the people he had met before. He even read a sense of joy from some of the words. It was obvious that this person successfully broke through the realm at the last moment, left the hidden door of life and death, and saw the sun and the moon again. Although Zhang Yan did not know which senior from the sect this was, and how many years ago he had been cultivating here, he was also affected by the joy after breaking through the gate of heaven. He immediately picked up the wine bottle and raised it to congratulate him. Then he raised his neck, and a silver thread flowed from the bottle into his throat, turning into a hot stream that flowed into his stomach, warming up his body. It was quiet here, so he stayed in the cave for a few days. He briefly sorted out what he had gained from this trip, and counted with his fingers. It had been 25 days since he entered this world. He thought to himself, today should be the day to leave this world. He got up and walked out of the cave door, and saw the cold wind blowing in front of him. The sky was full of hail rain, the world was white like a silver blanket, but in the extreme north, all the wind and snow were blocked by an invisible force, and could not enter at all. Even just by standing here, he felt a sharp chi that made his skin feel like it was going to crack, as if it was stopping him from moving forward. That must be the person who was imprisoned by Elder Yuan Zhonglao. Zhang Yan was not that curious to see what was going on. The person who was imprisoned here must be a powerful cultivator. It was not someone he could come into contact with his current level of cultivation. It was better to leave as soon as possible. After a few glances, he shouted, jumped on the cloud, and flew away. When it was noon, he took out the talisman that Elder Yuan gave him and opened it, and a golden light flashed around him, carrying him up. In an instant, he broke through the barrier and came out of this world. In his eyes, the world changed, and he saw white clouds, blue sky, blue sea, and a cool breeze. The sun hung high in the sky. Looking up from there, desolate. The chilly wind howled as he came out of the boundary. His heart and body immediately felt relaxed. With a long whistle, he shook his sleeves and flew towards the south. The journey back was also uneventful. Not long after, they returned to the clear nether heavenly lake and opened the formation gate. Just now when he entered the main hall, he saw Luo Xiao, who seemed to have been waiting for a long time, came up and bowed. This servant awaits master's return. Zhang Yan paused, glanced at her, and said with a smile, when did fellow Taoist Luo return to the mansion? Did your trip go smoothly? Luo Xiao smiled tenderly and said, actually not long after master left, I have already returned to the residence. The journey was smooth and the most stable. However, there is one thing that I have to discuss with master. That Madame Chen is immortal. His body was weak and he could not endure the cold energy in the clear nether lake. Thus, I made the decision to let Kun, bring his mother to the 9 cities to settle down. Zhang Yan nodded his head and said, that is good too. After Kun entered my sect, he has not been to the mountain gate. This trip can be done along the way. Luo Xiao giggled and said, this time when Kun went to the 9 cities, something interesting happened. Zhang Yan was instantly interested and said, what is it? Luo Xiao told him the story. That day when Tian Kun injured the dragon horse, he was stopped by Madame Wang. After an argument, they found out that Tian Kun was Zhang Yan's second disciple. Wang family instantly panicked. They had thought that their son would be able to enter Zhang Yan's tutelage, but they did not expect that their daughter would offend her senior brother before even entering the sect. However, this was not the most important thing. According to the rumors in the outside world, the moment Zhang Yan returned to the mountain gate, he killed Wan Zhang and Wenan. It was said that it was because these two had provoked Lu Yenni. It was obvious that this person was extremely protective of his people. It was not a loss to be his disciple. Madame Wang decided to let her daughter enter Zhang Yan's tutelage. Other than his first-grade corps, it was not without this reason. However, Wang family was also very afraid of this and tried to curry favor with Tian Kun and his mother. The master of Madame Wang was old and shrewd. It did not take long for her to see that this matter only needed to go through Madame Chen. Thus, she was very attentive. Not only did she buy a house and land for Madame Chen, she sent people and money, and arranged a suitable place for her to stay. She even had the intention to marry her daughter to Tian Kun. Although Madame Chen thought that her son could cultivate and live a long life, it would be best if she could have a grandson early on. She also felt that since the other party's daughter was also going to enter Zhang Yan's tutelage, it could be considered a suitable match. In the future, there would be someone to take care of in the sect. Thus, her heart was moved. However, everyone knew that without Zhang Yan's approval, this matter would not be possible. Thus, she anxiously asked Luo Xiao to come back and find out what was going on. Zhang Yan thought about it and smiled gently. He said, Kun is really lucky. There are not too many taboos and rules in my sect. Madame Chen is Kun's mother. Since she has the intention, and if Kun himself does not resist, I, as his master, will naturally not stop him. It's just that it doesn't affect his cultivation. To him, this was only a small matter. Ever since he came back from the little cold world, he was deeply touched. As the saying goes, the master leads the way and the cultivation is up to the individual. If the disciple only wanted to live a few hundred years longer and only wanted to enjoy glory and wealth, he could also fulfill his wish. Only those who had a firm heart of Tao and only wanted to live a long life would just now be the inheritor of the orthodoxy. He thought in his heart, Kun is the reincarnation of a great demon. If he really has a chance to reach the great Tao, he will naturally be able to break free from the web of the mortal world. However, if his Tao heart is obscured by the smoke and clouds of wealth, I can still guarantee him a life of glory. As long as I have repaid the karma of the past, this will be a test. When Luo Xiao heard Zhang Yan's agreement, she was instantly delighted. She said, good. Since Master has spoken, then this matter is settled. I will inform Madame Chen later. Zhang Yan glanced at her. She was so anxious. So she was waiting for his reply. However, he could understand Madame Chen's heart as a parent. However, Luo Xiao did not move. She hesitated for a moment and said, Master, if that's the case, then one of the Wang sisters is married to Tian Kun. If he only accepts her as a disciple in name, I'm afraid it's not appropriate. Zhang Yan frowned slightly. He said, the Wang sisters. Why? Are the 2 disciples that Yang Fenghe found for me both from the Wang family? Although he was not very concerned about this matter, if this Yang Fenghe dared to use his personal favor, he could not let him off easily. Luo Xiao's beautiful eyes widened. She said, isn't this what Master said? Zhang Yan was surprised. He asked, what did I say? Luo Xiao sighed. She said, Master previously said that the 2 disciples that you are looking for should be like Ning Chongshuan's disciple. However, Ning Chengshuan's two disciples are a pair of 12-year-old twin sisters. It is said that they are as beautiful as flowers and have excellent aptitude. Therefore, their aptitude must not be bad and they must be sisters from the same mother. Because of this matter, Yang Fenghe worried so much that he finally chose this Wang family. Zhang Yan could not help but feel that it was funny. That day, he only said this casually. He did not expect it to be like this. No wonder Yang Fenghe's expression was strange that day. He could not help but shake his head. After thinking for a moment, he said, "All right, then accept the sisters as inner disciples." He did not care about accepting a few more disciples. Compared to those masters and disciples who easily accepted dozens or hundreds of disciples, this was considered a small number. Luo Xiao said happily, "Since this is the case, can master choose a suitable day to invite a few disciples to come and observe the ceremony?" Inviting friends from the same sect to observe the ceremony was a proper thing to do. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and nodded. He said, "Yes, this matter will be handled by you and Yan Yi. There is no need to say more to me." "Yes, master." "Then this servant will take her leave." Luo Xiao bowed and left with a face full of joy. Zhang Yan returned to the main residence and sat down cross-legged. He took out a dendrogram of true sand and refined it into spiritual essence. This was his daily homework. Even when he was in the little cold realm, he did not neglect it. As for the vitality pure jade, he was not ready to absorb it yet. This thing was used to increase the power of the Dan. What he lacked now was not the power of the Dan, but he could not evolve it into supernatural power. This thing had to wait until he had cultivated the Dan Sha to its limit. It could be used just now. After he finished absorbing the essence qi of the true sand, he entered into a meditative state and began to meditate. At the same time, on the Pan Chi Island, a small flying sword flew into the temple on the island and landed in Feng Zhen's hand. He opened the sword and took a look, then sneered and said, I was wondering why this Zhang Yan disappeared after he entered the mountain gate a few days ago. Turns out he went to the small cold world. Feng Zhen was ordered by his Shifu to fight against Zhang Yan in 3 years to seek justice for Tu Xian and Wan Zhang. Therefore, he had to find a way to understand Zhang Yan's background. Although he was hostile to Zhang Yan, the latter was a first-grade Dan cultivator after all. He might have many tricks that Feng Zhen didn't understand. Therefore, Feng Zhen had been paying attention to Zhang Yan's every move. Sitting in front of Feng Zhen was Taoist Mo, who had watched the battle on Huamingji with him that day. When he heard this, he also frowned and said, "Little cold domain, why did Zhang Yan go to that domain?" Feng Zhen pondered and said, "I'm afraid he went to look for the experiences of those ancestors. Although Zhou Chengju has a high cultivation, he is not from our sect after all. In terms of cultivation, it won't be of much help to him." The two of them glanced at each other. Although they had roughly guessed what Zhang Yan wanted to do, they didn't underestimate him at all. Especially Feng Zhen, he felt a bit heavy in his heart. From this action, it could be seen that the master and his disciple must have bestowed some kind of cultivation method to Zhang Yan. Therefore, he wanted to seek the knowledge of that predecessor. However, as to which of the 3 Gong and 5 classics he practiced, outsiders did not know. Priest Mo said absent-mindedly, "Junior brother, don't worry. What can he cultivate in 3 years' time?" However, Feng Zhen's face was gloomy. He was much more familiar with Zhang Yan than Priest Mo. He knew that this person definitely couldn't be underestimated and couldn't be judged by common sense. Moreover, Zhang Yan was a first-grade Dan cultivator and had the ability to pull 9 whales. He was also in the first tier of the core transformation realm like himself. If they were to fight in 3 years' time, Feng Zhen really didn't have the confidence to win. He slammed the table in annoyance and said through gritted teeth, "Zhang Yan is a cunning person. I must know which cultivation method he cultivates. Otherwise, if I rush into battle during the sect's competition, I will definitely be taken advantage of by him." Target =_. Chapter 292. Priest Mo had suffered a loss at the hands of Zhang Yan. Even though he felt that Feng Zhen had overestimated Zhang Yan, it wasn't inappropriate to think this way. It was always better to be careful. Therefore, he agreed, junior brother is right. This matter should be resolved as soon as possible. Feng Zhen secretly thought of a countermeasure. He was now a core formation cultivator. With his status, he didn't want to trouble his granduncle for such a small matter. Therefore, he could only think of a solution himself. However, he wasn't a new cultivator from Pan Chi Island like he was 20 years ago. He had his own knowledge. After thinking for a while, his eyes brightened. He raised his fist and said, I got it. Priest Mo became spirited. Tell me about it. Feng Zhen cupped his hands and said, this method is flawed. Senior brother is experienced and knowledgeable. Please help me fill in the gaps. Priest Mo chuckled. Junior brother is too polite. I just missed a little. If you can help me, I won't hesitate to tell you. Feng Zhen's eyes flashed. Senior brother, do you still remember Tu Xian? Mo Dao thought carefully and guessed a little. He probed, junior brother, you want to find someone to test Zhang Yan? Feng Zhen nodded. Yes. This is nothing more than using the same old trick. Priest Mo raised his hand and slowly smoothed his beard. He said in a low voice, this method is feasible. However, it won't be easy to find someone. Right now, Zhang Yan is at his peak. Moreover, he has a first-grade Dan. Those with higher cultivation levels than him are afraid and won't want to show up. As for those with similar cultivation levels to him, who would dare to fight him barehanded? After the pill grading assembly, at least on the surface, Zhang Yan wasn't taught any mystical arts, magic treasures, or Dao weapons. Moreover, the 4 spiritual masters were all in closed-door training. The meaning of this was quite obvious. They clearly didn't want to shed all pretense of cordiality with the aristocratic families of Xianmen. The aristocratic families naturally understood the meaning. Moreover, they had just suffered a loss. The patriarchs of the Zheng, Feng, and Du clans were also in closed-door training. The 5 clans didn't say a word from beginning to end. With no one to take the lead, they could only lay dormant and wait for the competition in 3 years to decide what to do. Under such circumstances, the disciples of the clans were ordered by their elders to cultivate in their clans. Therefore, no one dared to jump out and provoke Zhang Yan. On the surface, the mountain gate was calm and tranquil. Feng Zhenshin smiled proudly and said, don't worry, I have a plan to pick one of them to fight against Zhang Yan. Priest Mo inched forward, unconsciously wanting to hear what brilliant plan his junior brother had. Priest Mo of Priest Feng of Feng had a thought. Mo of the table. Senior brother, do you know that Zhang Yan fought with the disciples of the various sects in the outer endless sea 20 years ago? Priest Mo raised his large chin slightly and said, of course I know. So what? As a disciple of the Xianmen aristocratic family, he naturally did not reject Zhang Yan's display of power in the outer seas. However, in his opinion, Zhang Yan was a Qinsang school disciple after all. So what if he killed a few disciples from other sects? If the other party had the guts to come looking for him, he would kill him on the spot without waiting for Zhang Yan to make a move. Feng Zhen shook his head and said, junior brother is not talking about those unimportant people, but... He paused. He lowered his voice and said, it's the Shao clan, Shao clan. Daoist Mo's expression changed. He seemed to have vaguely grasped something in his mind, but before he could delve deeper into it. Before he could think further, Feng Zhen had already uncovered the mystery. He said, rumor has it that Xiao Mu and Xiao Han were in the outer seas at that time. They haven't returned for more than 20 years, and the reason for their disappearance is likely related to Zhang Yan. Daoist Mo shook his head and sneered. It's not that I'm looking down on Zhang Yan. Given his cultivation at that time, it was quite possible for him to take care of Xiao Han. However, to take care of Xiao Mu, the Yuanying perfected one, is clearly a joke. Feng Zhen tilted his head and looked at him. Senior brother, have you forgotten about Tao Zhenren? Daoist Mo's heart skipped a beat, and his expression changed slightly. Feng Zhen said faintly, then why did Zhang Yan help Tao Zhenren seize the immortal abode in the outer seas? If Tao Zhenren helped him take care of Xiaomu, those two would have been easily captured and wouldn't have been able to fight back. Daoist Mo said angrily, how could Tao Zhenhong be so daring? But as soon as he said this, he immediately fell silent. At the realm of Daoist paradise, one wouldn't easily fight to the death with others. Even if Xiaomu was really killed by Tao Zhenhong, as long as there was no concrete evidence, the Daoist paradise masters of the aristocratic families wouldn't travel tens of thousands of miles to fight with Tao Zhenhong. If one of them died, the strength of their sects would immediately change. This was clearly not worth it. Just like the Battle of the Three Pools back then, it also ended with a formation because neither side was willing to fight hand to hand. Feng Zhen sighed and said, at this level of cultivation, what one does is no longer something we can guess. Daoist Mo thought about it for a while and said tentatively, if that's the case, junior brother wants to incite discord between the Shao clan and Zhang Yan. But since you know about this, the Shao clan must have known about it a long time ago. The fact that they haven't made a move until now is enough to show that they don't want to deal with him. Feng Zhen suddenly laughed and said, Senior brother, the reason why they're ignoring it is because this matter hasn't been made public yet. If we find someone to spread this matter in the sect, once it causes a commotion, do you think they'll be able to bear it? Daoist Mo sucked in a breath of cold air. This junior brother is really daring, even thinking about the Shao clan. He calmed his mind and thought about it seriously. However, he discovered a problem and said, although what junior brother said makes some sense, in my humble opinion, the Shao clan is one of the 5 great clans. Even if this matter were to spread out, it wouldn't damage their reputation in the slightest. In my opinion, they won't make any moves before the sect's competition. The Shao clan was a clan that had existed for thousands of years. A few rumors couldn't hurt them in the slightest, and they wouldn't jump out at this time to provoke the master and disciple line. More importantly, they definitely wouldn't be the first to make a move. Feng Zhen smiled mysteriously and said, I've already expected this. Even if those old fellows can sit still, what about those young ones? Daoist Mo's heart skipped a beat and he said, Junior brother is referring to, Feng Zhen said in a low voice, I'm sure senior brother knows that He's Xiao Han's brother, but he's narrow-minded, selfish, reckless, and impulsive. If it weren't for his rare aptitude and the clan not giving up on him, he would have been dealt with a long time ago. Senior brother, just look at how much trouble he caused after he formed his dan, and you can see how unreasonable and rude he is. Xiao He, an arrogant and impudent face appeared in Daoist Mo's mind when he thought of this name, and a wave of disgust surged in his heart for no reason. Xiao He was an extremely flamboyant person. He relied on his grade 3 dan and his status as a direct disciple of the Shao clan to stir up trouble everywhere he went. He had even killed several disciples from large clans for no reason. It was only because the robes those people wore were similar to the ones he wore that the Shao clan had summoned him back and ordered him to cultivate in the clan, not to leave unless there was something important. Feng Zhen lowered his voice and said, this little brother dares to conclude that the Shao clan is definitely hiding this matter from him to prevent him from making any mistakes. Otherwise, given Xiao He's character, how could he possibly sit still if he knew about this? He would most likely go straight to their door and cause trouble for Zhang Yan. Ha, there'll be a good show to watch then. Therefore, this plan of mine isn't targeted at the Shao clan, but at this person. Daoist Mo couldn't help but cast a sidelong glance at his junior brother. He didn't think that Daoist Mo could come up with such a plan. Although it was a little narrow-minded, it was still a plan. Feng Zhen's expression was rather sinister as he said, I'm not speaking nonsense. Given how fierce Zhang Yan is, Xiao He is most likely not his match. If he goes, he will definitely not return. At that time, let's see how the Shao clan responds. Daoist Mo's gaze was rather complicated. He suddenly sighed and said, Junior brother, good plan. However, you must be careful. Otherwise, if the Shao clan finds out that you did it, they definitely won't let you go. Feng Zhen snorted and revealed some anger on his face. He said, during the lower grade pill gathering, the 5 great clans incited the 12 houses to stand up for us, but they themselves sat back and did nothing. They reaped the benefits, but if anything happens, we'll have to shoulder all the responsibility. How could there be such an easy thing? Today, I'll make sure they don't have peace either. They'll jump into this pool of muddy water with me. Daoist Mo sighed heavily and said, very well. Since junior brother has made up his mind, then I will definitely do my best to help you. However, there are some details that we must consider carefully, lest we end up shooting ourselves in the foot. Feng Zhen said solemnly, I was just about to ask senior brother to come up with a detailed plan. Because of this matter, the two of them discussed in secret for an entire night. Only when the sun rose did they return to their respective caves. A few days later, news began to spread from the sect. It was said that while Zhang Yan was searching for medicine in the outer seas, he had encountered the Shao clan's uncle and nephew. At the time, the 3 of them were fighting over a medicine, and none of them gave way. However, Xiaomu was yuanying Jinren, so in a fit of rage, Zhang Yan later asked Tao Jinhong and Tao Jinren to lend a helping hand. In the end, Zhang Yan took away Xiaomu and his nephew, and they had yet to return. Many people were secretly excited when the news spread, waiting to watch a good show. However, the Shao clan did not make any moves, as if they had not heard the news at all. This inevitably disappointed many people, but no one dared to say anything. It was obviously impossible to say that the Shao clan feared Zhang Yan, but no one knew what they were planning. After the rumor spread, it naturally reached Xiao He's ears under the ingenious arrangements of some people. He also learned of the matter from a concubine, and was immediately enraged, declaring that he would seek revenge on Zhang Yan. However, the clan seemed to know that he was an extremely restless person, so they had sent people to keep an eye on him long ago. They ordered him to sit quietly in the residence and not go anywhere, lest he cause any trouble and make things difficult to clean up in the end. When the news reached Daoist Mo and Feng Zhen's ears, they were not anxious at all. They had already found out that Xiao He had not caused any trouble in the sect for more than 20 years, so they were no longer as strict with him as before. They only needed to wait to watch a good show. Target =_. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.